afternoon, everybody, and welcome to DNN, the Doomers News Network, where we skip all the cheerleading and we just give you the unwashed news as it is, felt and lived on the ground by the common person, because somebody has to. And with that, I am going to turn it over to my man, Travis. How are we doing today, Travis?
Jack, we're doing all right. We've got a hurricane barreling towards us right now, bearing towards Houston. Little spooky because the stronger it gets, the more in the path it's going to be. So a little bit spooky. But to the viewers, let me explain to you guys what's on the menu for today. We're going to start with our first segment, which is going to be led by me. And I'm going to ask the question, are we already in recession? Are we already in recession? And then video number 2 is going to be by Melody. Sorry for my phone. Oh my God, I forgot to turn it on silent, and we're live right now, and that's super embarrassing, and it's on silent now. And story number 2 is going to be by Melody. She's going to cover, and this is a huge story. Everyone needs to pay attention to this. I'm personally excited. It's about the Supreme Court essentially overturning the Chevron doctrine. Is this the end of backdoor meetings, the end of corruption, greed? She's going to cover that. Super excited. Jack's going to be doing video and story number 3, which is also pretty huge. It's on one of America's largest medical operators basically bankrupting hospitals. So we're going to kind of look into the question, is the medical system broken? As someone with pre-existing conditions and a huge family, I could tell you in advance to viewers, yeah, it's freaking broken and it's super unaffordable. Now, story number 4 is going to be by me. I'm going to ask the question I think everyone wants to know. This is going to be difficult, but when will homes be affordable again? In both of my stories, I will have some data. Really excited. I'll be interviewing both Jack and Melody on both those segments. The last segment, number 5, Melody's going to lead this. It's going to be a roundtable. Personally, you guys, I'm going to tread lightly. I hate politics, but we're going to ask the question, is Biden going to run again? Not really going to get, political. We want everyone to be calm, but it is important what's going on. I mean, what's going on in America needs to be talked about. So hopefully we could talk about that and navigate it. Melody has agreed to lead that. And without, before we get started, actually, let me pump the brakes. Let me see how my colleagues are doing. We really didn't get a chance to talk. Melody, how are you? Happy Sunday.
I'm doing well, Travis. I just returned from a chaotic week at the beach with lots of family, and I think I got a little cold, but overall I'm doing well and just happy to be back with you guys. I've missed you a lot.
Okay, I love it. Nice to see you. I missed you as well. Jack, how you doing, buddy?
Likewise, I am recently recovering from a week of chaos at the shore with the fam, which was a fantastic time, but of course, always a drain on mom and dad. And I am just delighted to be back with you two doing this again. I love these weekend live streams. So bring on the doom, brother. Let's roll.
All right, you guys, with that, I'm going to get started on the second. I'm going to get started this second on our first story. Let me share some of the data real quick just for the viewers. Now, I'm going to ask the question, guys, are we already in recession? Now, the reason I want to ask that is some people actually already think we are in recession. And to Jack, we talk about, we're not in a technical recession, but Jack, as well as I, they're probably going to revise the data. Danielle DiMartino Booth has said, gone on record, dude, we've been in recession since October of 2023. There are people in my comments that said, hey, we've been in recession since 2020, 2022. Travis, you're crazy. We're already in depression. So we're going to see what the hell is going on. And before we do that, before I ask them each 3 questions, I want to talk about some recessionary indicators just very quickly with the viewers, starting with this one. This is the 10 and the 2 yield curve inversion. This is one of the most trusted single sets of data that basically warns of an incoming recession. You guys, we've been inverted since about April right here, you guys. So April Fool's Day. Who's the fools here? Anyways, we got inverted. First inversion was April Fool's Day of 2022. So after that, guys, we've been inverted for 27 months. So it's been 27 months since the most recent inversion. Another indicator is the trajectory of the unemployment rate. We now have a 0.5 increase over the 3-month rolling average. I believe that's called the Said's rule of recession. Basically, guys, the trajectory of unemployment is saying we are 100% guaranteed. Everyone's crazy that's saying otherwise. We're going into recession. The trajectory of unemployment says that. That's the second indicator. Now, here's another one, guys. Obviously, the government jobs. Government jobs are not healthy for the economy. The annual change in government jobs has been about 25%. Couple of notes I want to go over here. The last time we saw government jobs account for 25% of the total was right before the Great Recession. So generally, when we have this type of government interference, it's the sign of an unhealthy economy leading us into recession. But on top of that, guys, the trajectory, this is all lagging data, by the way. Like boots on the ground in our households, we already know this. This is lagging data. But another indicator is the trajectory of defaults and delinquencies. Purchasing power is important to the economy. Confidence of the consumer is important to the economy. So when we see this, it shows the consumer's unhealthy. It also shows, in my opinion, either reckless spending or number two, inflation starting to hit our households. Now, the last indicator, again, you guys, is the government deficit being 1.2 trillion. This should update in the next day or so. No idea what this is going to update to. Maybe you guys know 1.4, 1.6. Who knows at this point? But we're sitting at year-to-date fiscal year starting October at $1.2 trillion. Just for the viewers so they know and understand, that's not a sign of a healthy economy at all. That's government smokescreen. It makes things very difficult to understand. Inflation is very sticky. But in 2009, the deficit spending was 1.42. So 1.42 trillion to take us out of the great financial crisis. We've exceeded that already this year. To me, that's pretty concerning. But those are a few indicators, again, just for the viewers, for you guys as well. And I'm going to start, if I can, with you, Melody. I'm just going to ask you guys 3 questions. The first question is, Melody, in your opinion, a lot of people respect you, your background, you're around a lot of smart people, you track the data, you're super honest, super transparent. Love that about you. So hard to find, both of you. Are we already in recession?
Yeah, so I'll have a bit of a contrarian take, Travis, as per usual. But I just feel like, we're having debates about things that don't really matter and technical definitions and things of that nature. I think a lot of you that know me know that I think we've been in what's a silent depression. That's a term coined by Emil Kalinowski since 2007. And I think we've never really fully recovered. We surely had a ton of government intervention. And we were able to kind of skim on narrative and a lot of part-time jobs. But in reality, I honestly feel like we've been in a recession or a recessionary environment for some time, and most just don't want to admit it. When you look at the labor participation rate, that's something that I follow very closely. We're missing 6 million people. And so we are not we're not producing the way that we used to. And so when you break the trend lines, I believe that means that you are, we're technically in a different environment. So that would be my contrarian answer, Travis.
Okay, so your answer is we've been in a silent depression since 2007, and the only reason that the public doesn't know it, government printing, would you say?
Well, yeah, that plus just ignoring. I mean, you can't, if you think about back to the Great Depression, things that we know now because we look at history books and we see photos, there were tent cities, there were people, so many homeless, people that couldn't find jobs. Well, if you travel to any city across this country, you're going to find that. Where you're not going to find it is in mainstream media. And honestly, I think a lot of times during the Depression as well, you didn't get that kind of coverage for political purposes. So I think this is just something that's been hidden. If you think about, if you guys remember what year it was that movie by Frances McDormand won all the awards, it was about van life, right? It was about her, her husband died. She retired. She was a temporary Amazon worker, and she sold her house and bought a van because she couldn't afford to live in her house. I think it was like 2018, 2017, somewhere around then. So I think these themes have been persisting for some time, but mainstream media has really done a great job of not covering it, as well as making us feel legitimately crazy.
Okay. Jack, sir, same compliments to you, but I want to spare the viewers, so just know I love you and respect you. Are we already in recession? Okay, but for you, let me add something, a little bit to the concoction here, a little bit of spice. understanding, I know we're not in a technical recession. Okay. I know we're not in a technical, Travis. It's not technical, but understanding, Jack, like they always revise data. In fact, they just revised a whole bunch of new home data. So can't we put the revising of data into the equation of your opinion, perhaps, in this question?
All right. So you're right to point out how, the technical and the definition, and let's not get lost on the nuance. And we just had the comment up there from which is my girl Nan, from one of the moderators over at my channel. And I agree, arguing over definitions is pointless and it's a distraction. And, that reached a fever pitch in the middle of 2022 when we had those 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. And yet everybody was like, no, we're changing the definition of a recession. So it's not. Yeah. We are in an environment where I think we're going to talk about this a little more later in some of the other topics, where people are being told, don't believe what their eyes and ears are telling them. Don't believe your lived, felt experience. And for, I think, 80% of the population in this country, probably more, but let's say conservatively, 80% of this country has been living in a recession, in a true recession, since the beginning of 2022, really since the stimmy stopped flowing. When the second the government stopped printing money and putting it in our mailbox, or just direct deposit, dropping that stuff right into our checking account, since that stopped, the quality of life of the average person in this country has started to gradually go downhill, because life started to get more expensive. The unemployment rate has started to steadily rise. All of the conditions that matter to a real person in life have been full-blown recession, in my opinion, for more than 2 years. And Melody makes a good point. You could argue going all the way back to the GFC. And then, of course, some people might take us all the way back to 71. Some people might take us all the way back to 1913 when the Fed was created. But I think most of the country is living in a recession right now. And I think very few people are doing really well. The ownership class is doing fantastic right now, as all of the assets are at or near all-time highs. Stocks closed at another all-time high on Friday. And so that narrow subset of the population that owns and controls everything is doing great. And they also own and control the media. And the media is on air 24/7 telling everybody, what's wrong with you? You have it so well. You're bad vibes. You just consume too much doomer content on YouTube. Why don't you understand how good you have it? And, I just don't think that is divorced from reality. And it's one of the reasons why we're here on this channel, because that cheerleading for the elitists and for the ownership class has just reached such a fever pitch. And it's to the point now where it's insulting to people. You're being told, forget the hardship that you're living through. Here's this obscure government data point that says you have it really great. What are you going to believe?
That's the first time I've heard you break it down like that. I love how the viewers are also like, yeah, who cares about the definition? They keep changing it. It creates division. I mean, what really matters, like you just said, I love that, Jack. Jack is saying since 2022, 60-70% of Americans have already been living in recession. I mean, I've felt it myself. It's hard to save money. I mean, I'm taking hits left and right. That was beautifully said, Jack. Back to you, Melody, with the second question. And if you can, and to Jack's point, talk about, let's show compassion and empathy, because we can, because we're normal people. I'm not filthy rich. I'm struggling like everyone. So we have the ability to show compassion. Plus Melody and I and Jack a bit too, lost a lot during the great financial crisis. So Melody, for the everyday person, just talking about real life, can you explain, from what you've gone through and experienced, everyday person, what happens during recession?
Yeah. So, Travis, I feel like there's been several points in my life where I've been impacted by these macroeconomic factors. And, when you grow up, you think it's your story. You think it's just what happened to you personally. And I think that's what a lot of people think when they read mainstream media, and they say, well, it must be my fault that this is happening to me, for instance. But my parents lost our home to foreclosure back in the 80s when inflation hit, and they thought that they had figured out how to budget. My dad was a teacher. At that time, my mom's plan was to stay home. Well, what happened? She had to go to work. That was not a decision that they wanted to make. They had plans for her to stay home, take care of the home, of the garden, the family. And when she went back to work, it caused all kinds of stress and strife. And fast forward, divorce, like home lost, then addiction, things of this nature, because you feel such shame and you feel such, like hopelessness. And so these are the kinds of things that can really, wreck families. And that is, ultimately my reason for being here on Doomers News Network is, although people are calling me a doomer, what I'm actually trying to do is to give people the tools to be prepared for what's coming their way. So they are not, so they don't then create generational strife for their family, because, they aren't prepared for the economic reality.
Okay, so you have a way with words, Melody. These are very complicated things. So to be able to take all this complicated stuff and just tone it down to where everyone can really understand is beautiful. And I want to respond like this. When I was full-time working at Keller Williams as an in-house loan officer, I would create 10 action plans before I would approve one loan application. And so these action plans consisted of how someone would need to improve their situation to buy a house. Okay, like improve credit, save money, whatever. But I always started with the very first thing. Okay, the number one thing, every single action plan was not to lose hope. Not to lose hope. And you essentially hit the nail on the head because you felt it, you've lived through it. What we can expect through a recession is loss of hope. Right. And all of that is encompassed there, maybe a job loss, unemployment. So well said, loss of purchasing power. Jack, can you, I know probably you were fishing on a boat, I think the last recession in Alaska. But can you explain to the viewers, again, showing empathy, compassion to the everyday normal person, like we have the ability to do so. I think that's why people watch us. I don't know. What the hell happens during recession?
Well, first of all, I wasn't an Alaska fisherman. I might be crazy, but I'm not that crazy. All right. I was a scalloper out of Barnegat Light, New Jersey. Smaller boat, smaller waves. In the wintertime, it's comparable to Alaska. In the summertime, it's a pleasure cruise. So I'm not quite that crazy. That being said, I remember going through the recession, right? I bought my first house with the money I made fishing. I also went back and finished college because I was a knucklehead and I screwed up in college when I had one semester to go. So I had to dig myself out of that hole. But I made really good money fishing. It was dangerous work. It was really hard work, but I did really well. I did what I had to do to dig myself out of my self-made mess. Then I bought my house, and all of that equity just went up in smoke in the GFC, right? I bought my house in summer of 2006. By 2008, it was worth like half of what I'd pay for it. So I literally lost everything in the GFC. I still own the house, but I had negative equity in it. So my net worth went negative after the GFC. That was a wake-up call. There's one big difference. I'm going to get a little academic here for a second. A couple of economists you may have heard of, Case, Shiller, and Quigley. All right. The first two, Case and Shiller, you're probably familiar with their housing index. Quigley is lesser known. But those three guys did a study of data from the 1970s through the late 1990s, studying the wealth effect. And how when you have recessions, when asset prices change, it changes people's behavior because it changes how people feel about their wealth. And Case, Shiller, and Quigley found that the stock market, when it comes to the average person, the stock market actually doesn't have much impact on how wealthy they feel. When stocks go up or down, it doesn't really change their consumer behavior, their spending patterns. However, home values absolutely do impact people's behaviors and their spending patterns. And they found that when homes go down in value, people feel poorer and therefore they spend less money. Even though the value of your home doesn't really have a direct impact on your monthly balance sheet, right? The in minus the out, and then, the difference is what you save or spend. But when homes are going up in value, people are more likely to spend more because they feel richer. And when homes go down, the opposite effect happens. And that's important for a recession, because if this recession is accompanied by a big drawdown in home values, as I suspect it will be, it's going to lead to that phenomenon of people feeling less wealthy and therefore spending less money on things that have nothing to do with housing. They're just out consuming less. And well, our economy is about 70% driven by consumption. And so the wealth effect, if the recession reaches home values, as I think it will, that is a whole different animal. And that's when it can get very severe, as we saw in 2008, which was really the first big housing-led recession since the early 80s.
Okay, so in other words, what happens during a recession? I mean, I like how you broke it down. You say the wealth effects. I think that I would call it the ego effect. I mean, can we say the ego effect? I mean, because I'm sick and tired of hearing these losers. I'm just kidding. They're not losers. They got millions of dollars and I don't. So they're the winners, right? Then what's with the ego? I mean, what's wrong with these people? I mean, help some people out if you have millions of dollars, for the love of God. I'm sorry. So during the recession, we lose a little bit of the ego or wealth effect. It changes the mindset of consumers. And really what Jack is pinpointing from what I'm hearing, Jack, is confidence and trust. It's shocking. It's really shocking to me. And it blows my mind. Maybe I should study more of this. You guys know that I'm with the slow reading group. Didn't even make it through college. I suck. Okay. But holy smokes, the economy is run off of feelings, trust, and confidence.
So yeah, confidence is a big one. When talking about housing prices and the wealth effect, it really does. It affects people's confidence and therefore what they spend. And that's going to affect employment. That's going to affect layoffs and things like that. If people stop spending, then we're going to lose jobs in sectors of the economy that have nothing to do with housing.
Yeah. So 70% of the economy is run based off confidence and trust. Okay. And we haven't even started the technical recession because they haven't revised the data yet. Anyways, because if once they revise the data to the truth, won't that affect confidence and trust? But moving on to the last question, because we're running a little long on my segment here. Melody Wright. Okay. She's got a Substack. You guys check it out. Are we going to do, we you know what? Melody and I are broke. Well, I don't want to speak for you. I'm broke. I want to travel around the nation. I'm broke, Melody. I want to travel around the nation. I want to cover Florida. We got to talk to the viewers about covering Florida. But again, you've gone through this before. All of us got hit. I got hit. Last question. How does the normal everyday person, knowing they're a little bit stuck on the rat race, how do you prepare for recession, Melody? How do you become successful at the other end of it? How do you find good deals? How do you prepare for this?
Yeah. So I'm going to say a lot of things nobody will probably like, but for me, looking ahead at what was coming, I made a lot of radical shifts in my life. But the first thing you have to do is get out of debt. I mean, what's going to really wipe out a big swath of Americans this time around is going to be that credit card debt and those high interest rates. You just never can get out from under that cycle. And I would say, you have to reduce your doom spending. There is hope. In fact, like different than you and Jack, actually, during the GFC, I had no assets. So I actually did really well during that time. I was one of those people that what I had was a skill set. I could plug and play anywhere. And this is what I would say to people as well. You've got to be open to lifelong learning. You have to teach yourself new tricks, new trades. Because if you can plug and play, you'll be the one that gets the job when 10 other people don't. And so that's the other thing that I would do is sit down and think about, okay, what skills do I have that nobody else has? And what could I do if I lost my job? Or how could I do a side hustle that's not Uber? Because guys, I'm so sorry to say, those side hustles during a recession are not going to pay the bills. DoorDash, Uber, all that stuff, even OnlyFans isn't going to work out so well because people just aren't going to have the money to spend. And so, where you really have to think about what could I do if I was, backed up against the wall and I need to make extra income, what could I do? That's another thing. And then I'll just go back to the doom spending because, what we're seeing right now is everybody talks about experiences. What does that even mean, guys? Like what that means is that we have traded in our dream for a very ephemeral experience. Don't do it. Don't fall for it. Part of the reason we have is precisely what Jack and Travis were just talking about, that consumption is 70% of GDP. If we stop spending, then everything comes crashing down. The problem is that every time you spend when you don't actually have the money, you are becoming, a debt slave. And so these are the types of things, just look at your current situation. What could you do to save money? How could you more aggressively reduce debt? Could you get some chickens so that your eggs aren't $6.99 at the grocery store? I mean, Jack has some chickens. I'm getting some chickens. Could you plant a garden? All of these things you just have to, just start to take the steps now. Another thing I did is I consolidated households. I moved my mom in with me. Before that, I was thinking of carrying a mortgage for her. That just doesn't make sense with what I'm seeing ahead. And so these are the types of things I would say are how you can prepare for a recession. But honestly, the most important thing, and this goes to the name of your channel, Travis, is your mindset. And this, honestly, a recession can be an area of great opportunity for people, because if you are paying attention when everybody else, all the Airbnb bros and everybody that with those big egos and their millions of dollars are like, they don't have anything left, you're going to be the one that's going to be able to go out there and take advantage of the opportunities.
I mean, I can't follow that. That was so powerful, Melody. I want to go in that corner right there and just curl up like a little child in a ball, because I'm scared now. She's so powerful. I mean, you guys, did you hear what she said? I mean, she hit the nail on the hammer. I mean, it all starts with mindset. With your mindset, you could do anything. And she basically said, stay open to learning, right? Understand your value, even if it's plug and play. And when you understand your value, understand your skill, but fall in love with it, almost obsess, be proud of yourself, right? You also mentioned cutting expenses. I love your self-employment analogy. Oh my gosh, that was good. Cut expenses. She consolidated household. I absolutely love, this is one of the biggest reasons I lost everything. I was in a credit card trap. When I lost everything, I filed bankruptcy. I was in over $100,000 in credit card debt. I was in that trap because credit card debt's horrible. You cannot pay it off making minimum payments. You're in credit card debt for the sake of argument for freaking ever. Okay, so it's horrible debt. People are in a trap. People can't get out. So but you don't have to be one of those people, right? You change your mindset. You change your spending. Get out of credit card debt. Number two, mindset. Number one. Number two, get out of credit card debt. Well said, Melody. Well said, Jack. I think you're on the losing end here. We're not in a competition, but in the private chat, this is a competition, brother, and you're losing. My opinion, let the commenters judge you. We love to be judged as human beings, of course. I mean, who doesn't love being judged, right? Jack, how do you prepare for recession? The everyday American citizen, consumer, some of them care, some of them don't. How the heck do you prepare, brother?
All right, so let me say to our target audience here, I'm guessing the average DNN viewer is probably middle class, upper middle class, maybe probably got a little bit of wealth and assets, maybe not loaded, but they live a comfortable lifestyle and they're self-educating, trying to learn more to reach that next level. So in a recession, I think it's key to remember that losses are more powerful than gains. All right, it's always important to keep that in mind. Let me give you an example. All right. You got $100 worth of a stock or $1,000 worth of a stock, and that stock goes down by 50%. You need to make 50% to break even, right? No, that is wrong. If you lose 50% on a trade, now you need to make 100% on your next trade just to break even. So that 50% loss was twice as powerful as the gains you make to recover from it. So I think the key is to avoid losses in a recession. And, I was a little early calling the recession, as a lot of people were. So I've sat out this monster move in the stock market. I've been sitting in gold, silver, Bitcoin, and treasury bills since really the middle of 2022. So I didn't catch the AI mania. I didn't ride the S&P to all-time highs. But you know what? Gold is at an all-time high, or a few dollars below it. Silver is at a 30-year high right now. Bitcoin is just rallying like the blazes the last few weeks notwithstanding. So I've been positioned very defensively, very carefully to avoid losses, to make sure I don't get wiped out like I did last time during the last recession. So I think avoiding losses is more important than going after those big gains. Pay attention, you people who are chasing tech stocks at these valuations here. Think about that, lose 50%. What do you need to do to gain it back? So I like things like preserving wealth. I like the U.S. Treasury bills. Right now I could still get over 5% on a 1-month T-bill. I'll take that. I like gold and silver at all-time highs. And the other thing is, keep in mind what the reaction to a recession is likely to be. Why is gold and silver at an all-time high? During recessions, typically gold and silver go down, but it's what is the government and the Federal Reserve's reaction to that recession? Almost always lower interest rates and print money. And that's why I think gold and silver are sniffing that out while they're near all-time highs right now, is because of that reaction to the recession and what that's likely to cause.
Great answers, Jack. I just realized I'm not part of the middle class. I mean, I'm over here as well, with Melody. I'm just trying not to be depressed in the corner. You know what I mean? I'm working on my mindset, trying not to get into credit card debt. You're talking about minimizing risks, minimize your losses for the people that have that much money. But I like your point. I like what you were saying. Risk off, right? My money for my down payment for a house is in, safe investment. Losses are more powerful than gains. I think you said it well. I think it hits a wide range of us. That's pretty much going to sum that up. Let's see if there's any, you guys, any questions for me before we move on and I take some comments here.
Well, Travis, what do you think? Are we in recession right now? I see you have on Danielle's shirt, so maybe this is time.
This is my shirt. This is my shirt.
Okay.
I don't wear no one's shirt but my own shirt.
Is that what you're saying? Danielle might differ on that, but
she has one, by the way.
I'll tell Danielle right now. I'll call her out. Hey, this is my shirt. I mean, we got a problem with my shirt. But
we gave her one of those shirts.
I gave her 3.
Yeah. Okay.
3 of these shirts.
Yeah.
Are we already in recession? Here's the problem, man. I mean, first of all, this is a loaded question, but the moment that you remove the deficit spending, we're in depression. I think we really have to acknowledge the inflation. I think we have to acknowledge the deficit spending, the fact that it's kind of a stagflation environment. We've already collapsed and had massive unemployment. I think as a result of purely deficit spending, mortgage-backed security purchasing as well, quantitative easing, man, I think that they've kept us out of recession. I think, again, like you said, depending on your household, you've been in recession. When you remove the deficit in the government intervention, mortgage-backed security, we've been in depression since 2007. I'm not debating that. I'm not debating the interference of the government. What I'm saying is this is just how things work, and it sucks. And I do not believe, I don't believe so, Melody. I think that there's more pain still. I think that they've made this market so toxic with inflation. It's going to hurt before we get to that, past that threshold. So I don't think we're there yet. I think it's going to hurt more. I think we're very close. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's more pain. I just think that unfortunately they have broken the financial markets with inflation. And now we're paying for it. We're sitting here, we're suffering when we're paying for it. And it doesn't seem American. Okay. It doesn't seem American, but this is a situation and I have to acknowledge it. So Jack, any questions?
Now got a couple of questions in the comments there asking people to define middle class. And that was a really good question. And I've been trying to ponder that.
Here it is. Boom.
A few years ago, I might have given an income level as makes you middle class. But now with inflation being what it is, I wouldn't even try to venture a guess. I mean, how would you define middle class at this point? Is home ownership a threshold for middle class? Well, no, not necessarily. That's a really good question. And I'm having a hard time coming up with an answer to that. Go ahead.
I can answer it because I'm not in the middle class. Okay. So like the middle class is when you have to worry about like gains and like, minimizing risks and losses and stuff. And like not middle class is like when you're working on like mindset and you're like in the corner back there all scared and stuff like me. So I would say that would be the definition. But what do you think, Melody?
Travis, yeah, I like your answer to some degree.
I'm not middle class, man. I'm not.
No, but I think it is. What a lot of people define it as is, really you only needed one person to be working, to sustain your existence. You were able to afford your home, your property taxes, your insurance. And maybe it was a smaller home, by the way, guys. It didn't have to be a McMansion, but you were able, to pay your bills. You had money in the bank, and a $1,000 emergency would not crucify you. And so I think that, with 60% of Americans unable to afford a $1,000 emergency, then we really, it feels as if we don't have a middle class anymore. We have the top 20%. We have a tiny sliver left in the middle, but I'd argue probably not really, because they're so over leveraged. So even those that, when they say they can't afford $1,000 emergency, what happens if you take away their credit cards? How many more people can't afford $1,000 emergency? And so without debt, or, sort of without credit, I should say, like, a lot of credit, I would argue that probably there is no more middle class.
I mean, when credit cards are the lifeline to your lifestyle, something is broken, you are in a trap. Credit
Yes.
cards should not be the lifeline to continue your lifestyle. Jack, I got a question for you, a little bit polarizing, but he's basically asking, the next recession may be caused by World War III. Hypothetically, China cuts off imports into the U.S. Scary question to Jack. How do you prepare for that type of situation and depression?
So if China cuts off imports to the U.S., China is also cutting off their own exports. So that is not a China has us by the cojones situation. I would submit China needs our shelves more than we need their crap on it, to be honest with you. All right. We get a lot of our plastic consumer garbage that breaks in 6 years from China. Now, the U.S. is relatively food and energy secure. We still import a lot of energy, but we produce a ton of it. So if it really were to come to like a trade embargo, keep in mind, U.S. submarines parked outside the Strait of Malacca, right outside of Singapore, would absolutely smother the Chinese economy. So I think China would be more hurting in that situation, to the point of like great famine hurting, if that were to happen. The one real vulnerability I think the U.S. has, and something you would want to consider preparing for, is medicine. We get a lot of our medicines from China still. And if China were to cut us off, I think that would be a very real felt danger for a lot of people. So if you have conditions that you're dependent on regular maintenance medicines, having a plan for a backup or even a supply, if you can possibly stockpile it somehow, is something to think about. But beyond that, I think that scenario would be more painful for the Chinese than it would be for us, believe it or not.
Moving on to the next question. MREs, I have a ton. I have a whole bunch of boxes. The good MREs, the peak. Melody, question for you. Take a jab at this one. This should be fun. Trey, love you, Trey. Thank you for watching, brother. He's a huge member of the community. Real big shout out to Real Estate Mindset community. I love you guys. Thank you for your support. I can't do anything without you guys. I'm doing all this for you. Thank you for the life you've helped me make. I want to get back to you. Question, Melody. Trey, I love you. Why are homes staying in pending at record rates? Why?
Well, like a pending sale, I think that's because people
Option
can't,
pending.
they can't qualify. I mean, I think that's the biggest part of it. We just saw Optimal Blue came out with this. We had lower rate locks in June, so what that means, what a rate lock is when you have a mortgage and you lock on that rate to do the origination of the mortgage. And so those are lower, meaning that less people are even trying at this point to get a mortgage. And if they try, if they do try, they're getting denied, or they're looking at that final insurance bill and saying, you know what, I can't do it. And so although we did see mortgage applications up a little bit, not from historic levels. And so I think that, a lot of people are talking about increased activity. The reality is you can increase activity all you want, but if they can't qualify or they don't have the cash to purchase that purchase that home, then it's not going to result in completed sales.
Trey, buddy, they can't afford it. So thank God it's been pending, because maybe they'll have a second epiphany or something. Because the first epiphany was like, you know what? It's a great idea to buy a house. I have to do it. I have to rush to it, right? I'm ready. I can afford it. So hopefully they get that second epiphany and they pump the brakes a little bit. A couple more questions here. We'll move on. This Jack, just knock this one out, man. I mean, can recession and deflation occur at the same time for the viewers? Deflation is prices going down, not disinflation. No. Disinflation is inflation slowing. It's still horrible. Deflation, prices down. Jack.
Absolutely. Recessions are deflationary, or at the very least, they're disinflationary, which means they lead to prices going up slower. when you have contracting economic activity, you have higher unemployment, people have less money available to spend. And so they don't have infinite dollars to bid up NVIDIA stock prices or to bid up the price of gold or Bitcoin or any other stock or home prices. So absolutely, you start to see asset prices come down in a recession. That is deflationary. Now, does that lead to consumer deflationary? The GFC did. Remember how cheap gasoline got during the GFC? So that led to consumer price deflation very briefly, because then you have to start thinking about what will they do? What will the Fed do? What will the Treasury do? They'll borrow, they'll print, they'll lower rates. That's when it becomes inflationary. So it's kind of a sequence of events. You have to where's your beginning and your end? The recession is initially very deflationary. You start to see asset prices come down. That would lead to consumer deflation if they let it. They probably won't let it. They'll probably go Zerp and Burr, zero interest rate policy and printing money. So yeah, it can happen. It's guaranteed to happen if we just do nothing, but we don't know how to do nothing.
All right. And Jungle Book has a great question. I'm going to save that for my second.
Yeah, because I think this is a good lead into the next story. Jack's very last comment.
All right, guys. So moving on to our next story. And the next story is none other than the great, wonderful Melody Wright. Thank you for being here today. This is an exciting story. I'm looking forward to hearing about it, Melody. Sorry for stuttering. I was just that excited.
Yeah, sure. Okay, you can share my slides if you'd like as well. Okay,
sorry.
No, guys. So while all of us were preparing for vacation, something really important happened, and it's going to be a lot of legal jargon, and your eyes are going to glaze over. But this is one of the most important stories, I think, of the year. And this story here is just going to set the foundation for what we'll probably be talking about for years to come. Okay, so this was the overturning of the Chevron doctrine, or deference as it's known. And this regulation, this will touch almost every facet of American life. And what it's really going to do is kind of, so I'm going to give a little bit of history. Again, bear with me. I'm going to take some time to go through it, go through the areas that it impacts. It's going to be a little boring, but I'm also going to give you a real life example from my experience during the GFC with the CFPB. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is exactly what was this. So essentially this case, it goes back 40 years. This was all about what happens when there is a rule that is unclear, from a regulatory body. Well, basically what the Chevron deference is it said, well, the actual agency could decide or would have more of the weight in the decision than the court system, because they were the ones with the expertise. Now, for those of you that taking us way back to our elementary school or junior high lessons on, why the U.S. is so, different from many countries, is that we have, different branches of government so that we can make sure what's the song, guys? Do you remember, Travis or Jack, from Schoolhouse Rocks? Take a bill on Capitol Hill. And anyway, okay, sorry. That's okay. Essentially,
how a bill becomes a law. I remember that.
Yeah, how a bill becomes a law. And then
there's a shorter version of that via executive order. Done.
And just the idea that you have independent branches of government, and it's checks and balances. And they talked, always talking about checks and balances. Well, 40 years ago in 1984, essentially what this did is make the administrative state way more powerful. And in my opinion, and again, I'm not a congressional scholar, I'm not a legal scholar, so, I can't say absolutely on some of these things, but I'll say, but in my opinion, this gave a lot of weight to the administrative state. Now, I want to be clear that the lawsuit that was brought against this was paid for by some, like a conservative backed group, Koch. And so there's definitely a certain political camp that is for this, for overturning this doctrine. And so whether or not you thought there was administrative overreach before, the idea is now that the judiciary is going to have to be the final word on interpreting these federal statutes. And I'm going to give you an example for myself that will put this into context, because I very personally have experienced this. So back during Dodd-Frank, or after the GFC, and you had Dodd-Frank, and you had the CFPB, or the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, they essentially had all kinds of powers over my life as someone in the mortgage industry. And so I'm just going to quickly give you an example that if you were being accused of doing something incorrectly as an officer of a mortgage company, they could take you into a proceeding without legal representation, and they could ban you from the industry for life. They could give you civil money penalties, and you absolutely had no recourse. And so that kind of power, I don't think, is a good idea. And it was personally very scary for me, because at the time I was overseeing one of the most important sort of results from the CFPB rules, which was on third party organizations, because that's something that happened during the mortgage crisis, is that the companies were kind of accused of giving way too much of their power to these third party, like think about CoreLogic, one of Travis's favorite, or they were actually doing all the things, these third parties were doing the things that the companies themselves should do. And so a whole bunch of acronyms, but the OCC, all these rules came out from the CFPB about how you were supposed to do third-party oversight. And this was one of the positions that could have been subject to this banning from the industry, subject to this trial without representation. And so it was a very terrifying time in the mortgage industry. So I want to just go through some of the comments from the justices to give you kind of, a good representation of the pro and the cons. And again, I know this is dry, but think about Justice Roberts. The first thing he said is, this is going to allow agencies to change course even when Congress is giving them no power to do so. Okay. So that's what the Chevron doctrine did. It allowed all these agencies to think about this, to just this, we'll talk about it later. The very contentious student loan forgiveness is one of these topics, but essentially, as our government has failed to enact any sort of legislation productively in some time, this doctrine made it possible for the administrative state to take actions it wouldn't have ordinarily been able to do so. Okay, Justice Thomas said, the Chevron doctrine, he argued, requires judges to give up their constitutional power to exercise their independent judgment, and allows the executive branch to exercise powers not given to it. So on this slide, you're kind of talking about how these judges are, thinking about this previous Chevron doctrine that was overturned. And I can never say his name, but all today's decision means is that going forward, federal courts will do exactly as this court has since 2016, exactly as it did before the mid-1980s, and exactly as it had done since the founding, resolve cases and controversies without any systemic bias in the government's favor. And then I'm going to read this Kagan dissent comment, and then I want to stop at that point and give you and Jack Travis some time to comment, and then we'll start talking about the specific areas this is going to impact. So Kagan was the dissent, and she says, Congress often enacts regulatory laws that contain ambiguities and gaps, she observed, which agencies must then interpret. The question, as she framed it, is who decides which of the possible readings of those laws should prevail? For 40 years, she stressed, the answer to that question has generally been the agencies, with good reason, she says. Agencies are more likely to have the technical and scientific expertise to make such decisions. And so I think, guys, just to sum this up, essentially those who sort of were for overturning the Chevron doctrine believed that the Chevron doctrine really kind of took away powers from the judiciary and gave them to the administrative state. And so, and in doing so, the checks and balances got off balance. And so I just want to stop at that point before we go into the particulars of what this could mean, which is, I think, the most important thing. But Jack and Travis, just your initial reactions to this.
Well, I can
Okay,
tell you,
go ahead, Jack.
Mel, if you don't mind, Travis, I have lived this experience because as we discussed earlier, I was a commercial fisherman, and we did have National Marine Fisheries observers came out on the boat with us every couple of trips, and we had to pay them. We had to pay their salaries. We had to feed them on the boat. It was an extra guy was stinking up and snoring in the bunk room. Commercial fishing boat is a dangerous environment. There's another guy wandering around on the deck when there's metal swinging around. I mean, there's a lot that could go wrong there, and we had to pay for that. We had no choice. That came right out of my paycheck, and I didn't have a say in it. So, I've been on the wrong end of this decision before. That thing Kagan is saying about experts. I mean, this is a Supreme Court judge. What? Oh, experts are not capable of overstepping their legal boundaries. Experts are not capable of trampling a man's rights. We need to just step aside and let this all go because experts, where the hell is that in the Constitution? How do these people make it to the bench in the first place? I wonder. All this does is this reins in the power of the executive branch, which needs to be reined in because Congress doesn't do a dang thing. And for the last 40 years, the judiciary hasn't done a dang thing to rein in the executive branch. This restores the balance the founders intended. So I am just 100% rock and roll in favor of this decision. This is a libertarian's dream come true, and I'll just cut it off there.
Yeah. So before you go, Travis, I would just like to say that, I mean, we often 40 years ago when this thing was first decided, nobody realized the ramifications of it. I mean, it was thought of as not a very important decision. And then now it is one of the most widely, cited cases, which tells you that we swung to the other side. And so, as always, I'm sure there are going to be unintended consequences of this decision, but I'm also a fan of transparency, a fan of judges doing their job in the judiciary and doing that job of interpretation. It is not, to say that it's just the expertise. Well, that sounds a lot like Fed speak, in my opinion. But Travis, to you.
I mean, so to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Melody, but it sounds like the whole Chevron doctrine, and this is hard for me to wrap my head around that this actually exists, but it's giving a type of judicial superpower to third parties. To me, that seems un-American. To me, it seems like someone shady got into office to allow this type of crap. And maybe that's why they're so easily passing bills and everyone is rushing to print money without properly regulating it. So hopefully, what I'm hearing so far is once this is removed, hopefully it will remove more of the massive loopholes, right? Hopefully it will remove more of the greed, corruption, the fraud, and it will force agencies to do the right thing or stop, right? Instead of violating the Constitution of the United States of America. It seems like this law was extremely lazy and unresponsible, and it seems like them overturning it is a massive win for America. So I'm excited. I'm wondering when they're going to start enforcing this and when it's going to roll out.
Yeah, so it's already gotten, there's been a lot of challenges already. One of, I think the big debates is, will there be, legal challenges to prior cases? And I think that what they're trying to say, this is really go for it, but you are going to have challenges. And so I think that what I'd like to do is just talk about some of the areas where this matters. And for those of you at home saying, what, this doesn't make any sense, you're about to see that this impacts every aspect of your life, honestly. And so I just wanted to give you two little reactions from, opposing sides, one that was for, one that was against. So one of the lawyers who argued the case on behalf of one of the fishing companies, which again, just like Jack was saying, this is exactly what this initial case was about, is the example that Jack gave. But these were funded not by those fishing entities. I just want everyone to understand that as well, because it's important about who and why. But basically said, by ending Chevron deference, the court has taken a major step to preserve the separation of powers and shut down unlawful agency overreach. Going forward, judges will be charged with interpreting the law faithfully, impartially, and independently without deference to the government. This is a win for individual liberty and the Constitution. So very much, kind of saying what Jack said as well. Kim Meyer, she's the litigation director from the Southern Environmental Law Center, decried the ruling in a statement. The Supreme Court today says individual judges around the country should decide the best reading of a statute. I'm sorry, I couldn't keep myself from laughing. That is a recipe for chaos, as hundreds of federal judges who lack the expertise of agency personnel are certain to reach inconsistent results on the meaning of federal laws as applies to complex technical issues. Okay, guys, that's what judges do. I mean, I hate to, I really am trying not to be biased here, but when you think about the way that our government was set up, this is exactly what they're supposed to do. And if they are not qualified, then they need to move on along, in my opinion.
You know,
Okay,
this Kim Meyer lady, can I just take a crack at her?
Yeah,
All
you
right.
go for it, Jack.
Yeah, this Kim Meyer lady. Oh my God, judges lack the federal expertise. You know, oh, they can't. Now the judges are going to interpret the laws. That is exactly what the country was founded on. The legislature makes the laws. The executive branch carries them out, and the judicial determines if they are constitutional or fair. That is how this country was built. All right. So if you're sitting there saying unelected bureaucrats no longer have the ability to manufacture criminals via changing their interpretation of existing law, like that's a bad thing. Well, look at the group that she's working for, the Southern Environmental Law Center. These are the kind of people who wander onto your property and take a picture and say, oh, there's a puddle when it rains. That makes your land wetlands, and now you can't build a house on it. And somebody who saved their whole life to buy that property is now ruined. Well, yeah, now a judge gets a say in that. And that's not a terrible thing, right, unless you're Kim Meyer and you get off on having the power to do that to people. So
spicy,
again,
very
this
spicy.
is exactly the way the country was meant to be run. And the people who have all the power being stripped from them now don't like it. Well, that's too bad. Cry me a river. Just as long as it doesn't run through my property and make it wetland.
No, it's a wetland.
Yeah.
Exactly. And as we go through these examples, you're going to see so many instances of this that are just kind of creepy, guys, to be honest. And so, I talked about the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. This is a huge agency that came about after the GFC, and they did all kinds of crazy things, like the things that I just described to you. That idea that someone could go to a hearing and not have legal representation, to me, that is completely contradictory to what our country was founded on, and it's just insane. But some things that the CFPB has done recently is they just issued a rule that said buy now, pay later are credit card loans. Okay. I mean, these are the kinds of things that are happening without Congress getting involved. And so I just think that, we have to go back to those checks and balances, but we're going to go through a couple more places. This is another big one. And I think the reason why I said after Jack's last comment from the other segment wasn't a good segue is that a lot of the actions being taken by the Fed, a lot of the actions being taken by the OCC, the FDIC, just you can put whatever acronym you want to up there. They've done it by referring to the Chevron doctrine, saying our deference that they were the experts, and therefore they should have the final say. But with this coming down in this way, that will be challenged. And so this has the potential to impact the ability to do future bailouts. And this is really important. And not a lot of people are talking about it. And we're going to talk about the Washington Post story that gave 8 ways that this was going to be impactful. And the fact that they didn't mention that or spend a little bit of time only on the financial aspects, guys, and instead they focus on the political aspects of transgender rights, student loans, things like that. In reality, this could be a sea change in what response could happen in the next financial crisis. And so the SEC, kind of specifically, this is one where the SEC could they could do the same thing that I was just talking about the CFPB, and they could, basically take you to one of these administrative proceedings without actually giving you a jury trial. And so now that is coming into question. And some others, the banking industry, something we talk a lot about, Basel III. So think about this. We've heard a lot about these new capital requirements. We've talked about them on this show and how the banks are going full court press to get out from under those capital requirements. In fact, Chase just said, hey, we're going to start charging you to hold your checking account because we're going to need to do that to pay for these. Okay, guys, no, but whatever. But Basel III, so all of this, these things could come under criticism precisely because this Chevron case has been overturned, and so it's going to impact so much of what we discuss here. And like I said, I'm not a legal scholar, but I just want to lay the groundwork because I think we're going to be talking about this for the next several years. Some other ones: anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, national bank corporate powers. And these are essentially the corporate powers of national banks are enumerated in this statute they mention here. And since national banks are not limited to the specific enumerated powers, the court relied on Chevron and deferred to the OCC's reasonable interpretation, reaching its decision. Okay, I just talked about the OCC because back during the GFC, and I'm so sorry, we're going to have to put a dictionary, guys. Like, we're going to have to do the Doomers News Network dictionary where we just explain what all these acronyms are. But the OCC, or the Office of the Comptroller, they came out with all these rules on third-party oversight, and those were basically law to the banks. The Fed came out with their consent orders to the mortgage companies. This doctrine is how they could do all of those things without getting congressional assistance. Digital assets. Okay, so whether cryptocurrency or other digital assets are investment contracts under the Securities Act of 1933 and therefore subject to SEC jurisdiction is another example of a possible challenge in a post-Chevron world. Can you imagine? I mean, this is a big deal, right? So then net neutrality. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but this is where essentially internet service providers, there's just been a recent rule that was issued by the FCC that said that these internet providers could not throttle content based on being paid to do so. So this is obviously, you can imagine there are a lot of people unhappy about that. Industry giants have sued over the rules, which they felt are broadening the FCC oversight of those firms. So already challenges are happening. This was just passed last week, guys. So this is hugely disruptive. Intellectual property rights. This is impacting a big Google case about Sonos the speakers. But just know that essentially there's a lot of vested interest in this case as to whether, Google violated these patent rights. And so they've recently just now asked the U.S. Court of Appeals to take another look based on throwing out the Chevron deference. So this is hitting the tech sector. This is hitting the financial sector. I mean, this is massive news, and it's just hard to understand. Workers' rights. Recent Labor Department rule on, the kind of overtime. This is now also being challenged in Texas. And so workers' rights, this is going to impact probably, the Labor Department's ability to establish these different, this one act they're talking about, the 2022 Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act, that also, it provides new pregnancy and childbirth related accommodations, one of which is about providing reasonable accommodation for abortion. So, and then student loan forgiveness. This was so if you go to the Washington Post article and you read it, I changed the order. If you read it, the very first thing they talk about are these political things that are going to hot button issues like student loan forgiveness. And so, we've got two different ways that the Biden administration has been trying to do an end run. And those are both being challenged right now. There are AGs in 18 states that have sued to stop the Saving on a Valuable Education program. And then you've got these attorneys for career colleges and schools of Texas trying to block this one rule about, forgiving loan amounts based on whether they thought the school was a bad actor. And so let me see, I think, and then protections for transgender students. This comes in. And before you say, this is just a Biden thing, this was actually a Trump thing before it was a Biden thing. And there's not a lot of differences, but it's how they defined sex in Title IX, which has been around for a very long time. And so this is also going to be challenged. And then lab developed medical tests. A lot of academic hospitals develop their own tests for things like cancer and Alzheimer's. what this new rule was trying to do, the FDA was trying to do, is try to say those tests are medical devices, and they should have delegation over that, or oversight. So this is also going to be challenged. And so, yep, that's the, you can take down the slides now, Travis. But so, guys, all across the country right now, there are lawsuits being launched, and this huge decision, and it's going to impact all of us. And honestly, it is going to change the conversation on bailouts, absolutely, because a lot of those administrative powers. If we had known what the Fed had done during the GFC with those, backdoor lines, swap lines, it's that type of thing. They cannot operate under the cover of darkness any longer by saying that they're the experts. And so I believe that this is going to make it more difficult for money printing in the future, honestly. So,
Okay, I have a question.
I hope I have an answer.
You'll have an answer. I don't know what it will be. First of all, oh my gosh, shame on me for not celebrating this. This sounds surface value, especially from you presenting that socialized data, if you will, and laws. I mean, this sounds like a massive win for the OG Americans, man. The OG Americans, maybe not the young kids but it's curving socialism. I think that's great. My worry is this: manpower. Right. If you're going to, first of all, CFPB is incredibly strong. I understand how strong they are. They're very aggressive with interpretation. I think this is, again, a great for America. We're curving that socialism, that Keynesian way of doing things. All great. But who the hell is going to replace them? That's my worry. And my question to you, Melody, is there a potential? Obviously, we know there's a lack of manpower. We know that from the FTC. I don't know if you've ever worked with the FTC. I have. They're freaking unbelievably is useless. Do we have the manpower to set something up where it's not a potentially more evil situation where someone comes in, learns the loopholes, take advantage of the loopholes, right? We're in need of an agency. We're in need of help. There's not enough judges. There's not enough interpretation. It's good we're removing individual judgment, but will they find a way to just do you see what I'm saying? Is this just going to be
there's
some BS,
always
Melody?
there's always some downstream implication that we can't foresee. There's always somebody that's going to figure out how to, get around the system. But what I love about this is it's bringing everything out from the shadows into transparency, where judges will decide. And so, of course, a lot of people argue that the Supreme Court was packed, for certain decisions. And I would say that, the recent CFPB decision on their funding and whether that was constitutional, I believe must have been some horse trading going on to get that one through, knowing that they were pulling the teeth out on the back end of the CFPB in many ways. So yeah, Travis, there is always the opportunity for workaround and like you say, just lack of resources, but they will not be able to move forward until those decisions are made. Whereas they've been moving forward without any care or concern, in my opinion.
I mean, it's good. Again, it's just I don't trust a lot of what I've seen recently, especially when we went on a trip and you showed, I won't talk about the September 11th, but this is a good first half, right? It's a good first half, but my worry is what we've been seeing recently. They go, the first half is great. And then someone else comes along, they pass a new law and it's freaking useless, or they pass a law for the public. So we simmer down. And again, where's the solution there? I mean, it's great. The transparency is good. We could talk about it. That's step one, Melody. Step one is great, that transparency. But what's step two? What's step two here? I mean, seriously,
execution.
So there's not enough judicial reviewers. Would you agree with that?
I don't think I can answer that question. I think that that's something we'd probably have to look at, but there's not enough of anything right now. And I'd rather if it has to go on a court docket versus being decided in a back room that nobody has access, like a FISA hearing or something like that. I'd much rather at least it has to go on a docket and everybody knows it's there, and it may take some time, but that's the thing. This is curtailing executive powers in a big way, in my opinion. But Jack, you look like you were wanting to say something. Mute.
Oh, I'm just chomping at the bit, Melody.
I could tell.
Let me at him. Look, maybe we don't have enough judicial reviewers, and maybe that's because too much judicial review is required. Maybe that's because our laws suck. And if only we had a whole bicameral governing body whose job it was to make laws. And I had a tweet from Elizabeth Warren was going viral a few days ago talking about how, oh my God, this decision strips the ability of the expert agencies to make laws to protect us. And I'm like, hey, Senator Karen, isn't making laws kind of your job? Aren't you a United States senator? Isn't that your constitutional mandate to make laws, not the Department of Experts, ABC?
Right.
So, like right now, it's freaking Jerry Springer in Congress. You got Marjorie Taylor Greene fighting with the squad about hair comments. And I mean, honestly, I think this comes back to Congress. Congress is going to have to do their freaking job. If unelected bureaucrats can no longer legislate via interpretation because the judges will do their job and rein them in, then Congress needs to step in and make the laws more clear. They need to make specific targeted laws that don't overstep. And, well, to that lady at the Southern Environmental Law Center, if you can't get the law through Congress that you want, it's because half of the country or more disagrees with you. And just because you think you're an expert doesn't mean you get your way. Democracy can be messy. Our constitutional republic can be messy, but we have this separation of powers for a reason. And I think the sector that is going to be most impacted by this is the legislative sector, because maybe, just maybe, this Supreme Court decision forces this circus in Congress to get their stuff together and finally start doing their freaking job.
Agreed. And I think, Jack, it stops this. Right. Like the Fed has been, over and over talking about, hey, we can't fix this. Like, Congress has to step in. Like we are going to have different policies, and everybody's just pointing at each other and not acting. But I agree with you. Congress is about making laws, and they have done. The reason why everything's gotten out of control is that they're more interested in, shenanigans, fist fights, wearing ridiculous gowns to, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, whatever. That's all show. It reminds me so much of the Hunger Games, when they go to the Capitol. I mean, honestly, guys, close your eyes, step back, look at our Congress, and then close your eyes again, and then look at those people at the Capitol in the Hunger Games. Especially look at the pictures of them at the Met Ball, for instance. There is no difference. I mean, we are in such it's completely farcical at this point. And so I think that, it's, Travis, I get it, the cynicism. And I also am cynical. All I'm thinking about right now is what am I missing? Because it does feel like a win, which makes me think I need to slow down and figure out the loopholes. But I do think, guys, this is so huge. And everybody, I'm sure you were around for the 2020 election and you heard about the deep state and you heard about this. This is kind of those conspiracy theories. We're talking a lot about these unelected officials. And I'm sorry, Travis, I think Jack's little quote, or that very first, when I asked him what he wanted to say, we gotta put that, we gotta tape that. It was absolutely perfect. And I think he's now winning, just so you know. Melon heads are winning.
It was your time to present. I didn't want to do you like that, but he is winning.
Yeah,
slightly. I'm so
totally.
far in last. I'm out of the equation completely. I mean,
whatever. What ifs?
I mean, great.
Anyway,
stuff,
no.
Marty.
So again, we don't know how this will work, but I believe it is going to put the pressure on Congress to start doing its job.
Oof, that's a crazy comment right there. I have a question, Melody, for you from the viewers. That was now. First of all, you covered a lot. I mean, we could literally talk an hour. No, you better to throw up on the table than like leave stuff out, right? Like, let me see the entire picture here. But my God, it was very powerful. Kind of makes you think like, are we not paying attention to the laws they're passing? It's a rhetorical question, but here's a question. I think comparing this to the early 80s is incorrect because of those two differences. I'm not 100% sure what two differences he's speaking about. What do you think, Melody?
I think we were talking about inflation. I can't remember. I saw his question come up. But, I think that the 80s, in my opinion, when we're looking back in history and trying to compare it to this time, and it might have been on the recession and deflation question. But in the 80s, we had a very different demographic picture. We were still, we were moving right along. We were still birthing babies, but also women were joining the workforce, and that was a huge economic force that really propelled us because they were able to come in and add that second income, and it then fueled that increase in consumption. And so, to me, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly where this question came in, but I think that the 80s are very different from today for precisely that reason.
I like it. I like it.
I'm not
This is
sure if I'm
this is a
answering.
this is a polarizing question. I think it should go to probably Jack a little bit as well. But Melody, question for you: if America gets serious about booting out 35 million illegal immigrants, would that free up housing stock? Would that lower rents? Would that lower housing prices? And if so, by what percentage? I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah, I want to take the NYC reference specifically, but Jack, you go ahead if you want to start.
Look, immigration, obviously a charged subject. The policy that we have in place right now, obviously not working. Just letting anyone and everyone into the country blankly and shipping them all over the place is not working. That being said, I've worked with immigrants in the past before. They are some of the most hardworking, gung-ho, just badass people. It was a pleasure to work with them. They produced a lot of value, and then they raised their kids here. And all the studies about the kids of first generation of immigrants end up being very successful. They have an entrepreneurial spirit. They are good for the country. That being said, our current policy doesn't work. So we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to close the freaking border, and then we need to put a big door in that thing to let people who are good for this country in. All right. And unfortunately, the screamers, I've said this before, the screamers on both sides of this issue dominate the conversation and nothing ever happens. We need both of these things to happen. Just outright rounding up 35 million people, the logistics of that and the consequences of that are going to be unbelievable. It is untenable. The solution is to stop the flow of them in first, and then figure out a way to weed them out, to separate the ones we want to let in, who can come here and be productive and benefit society, and keep the ones who are just going to be a drain out.
Yeah. And so I absolutely agree with you, Jack. This is divisive, but we have to be able to talk about it. And what I want everyone to understand is they're already here. And so, like you say, let's focus on closing the border to get a viable policy in place, creating that door for naturalization. Those naturalizations have had a huge economic impact. Where you see the trajectory, and they started increasing back in 1995. I'm hoping to do a much bigger story, but I want to take the NYC reference because this is one of the things that makes me crazy. So Travis and I were in NYC in New York in January, right, Travis, when we went, and the city is deserted. We were there for 4 days. We walked the entire city. I lived there for 7 years of my life, guys. The city's deserted. So in New York City, what's happening is they took some of the hotels that weren't being rented, guys. Okay, they had vacancy, and they turned those into shelter for migrants. One of the things that people aren't talking about is a lot of these people that own apartments in New York City, after that 2019 rule that you could not increase rent control units by a certain amount, they are holding them off market. And so it is a fake occupancy rate in New York City. You can walk that city and you absolutely know that they are not experiencing a housing shortage there. Now, maybe those aren't on the market, and because people are mad about that 2019 rule, and the fact that they can't even cover costs if they were to rent them out. And so that's a whole different discussion. But right now, the New York City situation specifically, I think people are trying to use it to create division. And there's more to that story than many are talking about.
We got a comment from Eddie here, and we'll try to wrap this one up here shortly. But Eddie's asking, Melody, actually, that reminds me of a question. Why can we not have a balanced budget. Years ago, there was a balanced budget amendment that did not pass. Is it unreasonable? Comment there, Melody?
Yeah, so I think someone else made a comment in the chat that I think is very important, and they said Congress reflects who we voted in, right?
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. And so we have to take responsibility for this as well. And the reason there hasn't been a balanced budget is because it hasn't been as important to enough people, And so I think that how does that start? Or how can we start affecting change there? We have to call our Congress members and say, listen, this is important to me, and I don't like the way you've been dealing with this issue, and I need to see traction, or I'm not going to vote for you. It's that simple. And so, we have to take some responsibility here, but I absolutely believe we should be looking at a balanced budget.
Jack, last question for you, and then maybe we can move on to the next. I thought this would be right up your alley, since you're middle class. Question. Spot price for silver is close to $30 per ounce, but Debt Clock has it at $240 plus. Is this a signal things are already collapsing? Any thoughts? Seems weird. Think that's right up your alley, Jack.
So I'm not familiar with that $240 data point. I know there is something about that the Debt Clock does with the price of silver. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Let me just address the spirit of the question, though. I think silver is probably the single most undervalued asset class in the world. Just my opinion here. I love silver. That's where my channel was born, was in the Silver Squeeze movement. I keep my little American flag, Go America silver bar right here, so I could flash it when I'm live, so every now and then. Silver at around $30 an ounce is nowhere near an all-time high. Gold is only a few dollars shy of an all-time high right now at 2,400, which was a new all-time high that it set recently. Silver's all-time high was either 1981 or 2011. I forget which one was actually the peak, but it was just under $50 an ounce was the all-time high that silver has reached. So even though silver has had a monster run in 2024 so far, it is nowhere near its all-time high. And therefore, in my opinion, just to catch up with the move gold has already made, silver would have to be valued almost 60-70% higher than it is right now. So I think silver is just a fantastic asset class. I own a lot of it myself. So I like that. Now, is this somehow a signal that we're somehow nearing the end? I don't know. My gut tells me they're going to do this cycle of cause a recession and then print and lower interest rates to get out of it several more times before it really blows up. It's not very doomer of me to say we could probably do this for 2 or 3 more cycles. But I think precious metals are going to run very strongly when that happens. And that's why I said earlier, it's not just what happens during a recession. It's what do our monetary and fiscal authorities do in response to that you want to be asking yourself. That's why I like metals here.
Melody, anything else?
I'll just say that Christmas, not this past year, but the year before, I bought all of my family silver and seeds, and I am proud to see those returns. I feel like I proved my macro metal with my family. So,
and I'll answer this just last one, just because it was addressed to me, and then we'll wrap this one up. Travis, have you been dipping into precious metals and hanging out to T-bills? The thing is yeah, actually I had gold and I had T-bills, but life has been hitting me like a freaking bulldozer. I'm spending all my money like Melody traveling around the nation. And honestly, guys, like I had to sell my gold. I hate it. I had no choice. I have a whole bunch of lifetime events. The last time you guys saw me, so much has happened. I went to go do a documentary on great hammerheads, catching them from land. When I was on the trip, found out that my house is a mold house. My whole family got sick. I had to rush out. I put an offer on a house, did a full comb of my market, try to be an owner, just wasn't willing to settle. Did the moved in. This is a whole new studio, set it up, and I had a medical procedure, pre-cancer removed from my intestines last week. So no, man, I don't have precious metals. If I had excess money, yeah, I would. And then it was a $3,000 bill just to take my 6-year-old to the ER. So, dude, so we got to decide, like, do we want to take the hit on our credit, right? I mean, geez, $3,000 is a lot, especially when you just move. So, Eddie, I think those are safe investments. I've had both of them, but brother, the inflation's hurting me. I'm not middle class like Jack is. All right, guys, that is gonna sorry. Moving on. That was what I was supposed to say. You guys, we're going to go on to the third story here real quick. And our third story is brought to you by Jack. This one it's going to be spicy. It's about hospitals going bankrupt. Jack, have fun, brother.
Yeah. And this story, guys, if you see the veins popping out of the side of my forehead here, forgive me. This one, I get pretty angry about this story the more I read into it. Travis, if we could we share my screen here? If you follow my channel, you may have heard this anecdote at the beginning before, but there are some new developments in this story. So please, stick around for this. What you're looking at here, this is Sungita Rashid after giving birth. She's here with her family, with her husband. And sadly, shortly after giving birth, Sungita Rashid died. She started to develop internal bleeding in her liver, and she was prepped for surgery. And as they were prepping her for surgery at the hospital, there was a problem. The doctors that were about to operate on her realized that they did not have this. This is a coil embolizer, which is it's basically a device that goes up. My cousin, the surgeon, was explaining how this works to me over vacation. My cousin is just an incredibly bright, talented, amazing individual. He's a trauma surgeon, and he was describing how this works. This goes inside your blood vessels and can be used to basically stop the bleeding, to close off a blood vessel, even inside an organ like the liver. And well, the hospital where Sungita Rashid gave birth didn't pay its bills. And she didn't know that when she went in to have a baby, that the vendor that sells coil embolizers came into that hospital a few weeks earlier and repossessed all of the coil embolizers that the owner of the hospital hadn't paid for. And so as they were prepping her for surgery, the doctors realized they didn't have what they needed, so they decided to transfer her to another hospital, and she bled to death while waiting. And so this hospital management team killed her with what do you want to call it? Negligence, fraud? I don't know what you call it, not paying your bills. This family was torn apart because of that. And this hospital was the same hospital that owned this case, this story. This is somebody posted this on Facebook about the Rockledge Hospital, saying, my grandma's in the ICU at Rockledge Regional for a stroke, and the sink in the room 4 feet away from her is full of standing black moldy water, and her entire room smells like sewage. This is at the ICU, the intensive care unit. Any idea who I can call and complain to? It doesn't sit right with me. Raw sewage sitting in a sink. And you can just see in the picture, there's an out of order sign placed over the sink. The raw sewage is still there, but it's okay, folks. It's totally sanitary and medically safe because somebody put an out of order sign handwritten over top of it. Both of these hospitals were owned by this company, Steward Healthcare. And if you live in the Boston area, you have almost certainly heard of this one because this company has been making news internationally recently. And let me just tell you, the socialists are circling like buzzards over this story. So pay attention because we are going to hear more about this one as time goes on. Steward Healthcare bought these hospitals several years ago. And they were formed by a private equity firm called Cerberus Capital. And Cerberus started buying up hospitals around 2010 after the GFC. And shortly after buying up all the hospitals, Cerberus Capital took their payout and they spun off a company and called it Steward Healthcare. Steward Healthcare now owns all of these hospitals that this private equity firm created or bought. And what Steward Healthcare did is they entered a sale leaseback arrangement. And they did this with a company called Medical Properties Trust. All right. Now, these are the two companies, Steward Healthcare and Medical Properties Trust, that are at the heart of this scandal. All of these hospitals owned their buildings and, they operated, they had their expenses and they had their income and they were treating people. Steward Healthcare comes in, buys up all the properties, and they sell the buildings to Medical Properties Trust. And then Medical Properties Trust rents the hospitals right back to Steward Healthcare for several $1 million a year. So what happened where previously you had a hospital that owned its own building and could therefore just operate in it, now those hospitals are burdened with hundreds of millions of dollars a year in rental payments to this Medical Properties Trust company. It's called a sale leaseback arrangement. And it's one of the ways that private equity firms are going around the country strip mining companies, and in this case, hospitals. This is also the same phenomenon that bankrupted Red Lobster recently. A private equity firm came in and bought up Red Lobster, sold all the buildings, and then the franchise owners could lease them back. And of course, one by one, it just bankrupted the company. That's exactly what Steward and Medical Properties and Cerberus Capital did to these hospitals over the last 15 years or so. And ultimately, it is now culminated in this story. Steward Health, the nation's largest physician-owned hospital operator, files for bankruptcy. This was back in May that Steward officially filed for bankruptcy. And let me just say, this physician-owned hospital operator talking point, Steward just loves to talk about this. That is a freaking joke, because here is the physician that owns most of Steward. This is the CEO, Ralph De La Torre. All right, Ralph De La Torre, who took the Hippocratic Oath, I would mind you, who's promised to never do any harm. Let me remind you about Sagina Rashid and the family that was torn apart by his business decisions. Ralph De La Torre is the CEO of Steward Healthcare. And, well, let's just see how Ralph De La Torre is doing. While his hospitals are going bankrupt, and while people are dying because he didn't pay his bills, well, there's Ralph De La Torre's boat. The Lady Sheridan, this is the $40 million yacht that he owns. Look at the dinghy on his boat. Well, first of all, his dinghy has a dinghy. There's his 3 outboard engine dinghy that is carried inside of this freaking yacht as he drives around the world, providing affordable healthcare for people from this yacht. This is the living room on Ralph De La Torre's yacht. That's the living room on his boat. All right. So while this guy is bankrupting this company, while he is bankrupting these hospitals, he's also paying himself tens of millions of dollars in dividends. He is strip mining these hospitals, making himself rich, and people are dying because of it. And now that Steward is filing for bankruptcy, there's all big questions about government bailouts of hospitals in and around Boston, because this company Steward owns more than a dozen hospitals in Massachusetts, and they're all going bankrupt. And so now the question is the government going to step in and bail out these hospitals? Well, then wouldn't they essentially be just bailing out Ralph and his yacht? If Ralph De La Torre strip mines these hospitals and buys a boat, and then the government makes up the difference, well, then guess what? The patients and the taxpayers ended up paying for this boat, didn't they? And then you end up with stories like this. Cancer patients devastated after Steward closes specialty cancer center in Brockton. They're closing hospitals. There are towns now that don't have hospitals because this company came in, strip mined them, bled them dry like freaking vampires, sold everything they could, and then the hospitals got so bad that they had to shut down. And this didn't just happen in America, guys. This is an international case. We've even got this one. Malta's former Prime Minister Muscat charged in connection with hospital sell-off scandal. This company, Steward Healthcare, they actually went to Malta, the small European island country, and they bribed politicians to sell their hospitals to Steward Healthcare so Steward could operate them. Now they have government-run healthcare in this country, so Steward was basically the government contractor that was hired to come in and run the hospitals. And of course, Steward did what Steward does. They ran them into the ground. They stripped them for everything they could. And now this small island nation in Europe, all their hospitals are going belly up because this American private equity firm bled them dry. And they were bribing politicians in order to get this deal through. Really just everything you could possibly hate about the medical system is so neatly packaged up and bundled up into this story. And, that was like a fast forward of what happened for the last few years. But then just this week, the story broke, and it adds a whole new layer to this one. We got this story. This is in, what's the name of this country? The Organized Crime Reporting Network, or I forget what this is, but this website, this story was in several different news outlets this week. U.S. healthcare firm embroiled in Malta corruption scandal spent millions on private spies. Now, again, this isn't just the Malta corruption scandal. They also did this in the U.S. But again, keep in mind, this woman who died at this hospital after giving birth, this family that's torn apart because Steward Healthcare did not pay for the coil embolizer that they needed to save her life. but they did have $7 million to hire UK-based intelligence firms that conducted surveillance and disinformation operations against its critics and even one of their own employees. The fees were billed to Steward's Maltese division, which was largely funded with taxpayer money. So this company was being investigated because of this corruption scandal with the former prime minister that they had bribed to be able to come in and buy up these hospitals. And there was a short-selling firm called Viceroy Research that did an expose on Medical Properties Trust. They very famously took out a short position against Medical Properties Trust, exposing this corrupt relationship between Steward Healthcare and MPW. And rather than pay their bills, Steward spent $7 million to hire retired British special forces to surveil, follow, investigate, and even manufacture compromat against the regulators and the short-selling firms that were digging into their dirty laundry. They couldn't pay for the coil embolizer to save Sangeeta Rashid's life, but they could pay $7 million to have ex-military follow their critics around. I mean, this story is gross. Let me just read you a little bit out of this article. A U.S. healthcare firm, that's Steward, at the center of Malta's biggest ever corruption scandal, authorized a spare, no expenses private intelligence operation, including one that targeted Malta's former health minister with what appears to be a fake compromising bank statement. Leaked corporate records show Dallas headquartered Steward Healthcare was awarded a 2.1 billion euro Maltese government contract in 2018 to renovate and manage 3 public hospitals. But when allegations of fraud and corruption threatened its cash-strapped business, Steward hired private spies at 2 London-based intelligence firms to deal with its opponents, the records show. Practices undertaken by these firms included leaking fabricated bank records, accessing sensitive phone data, planting fake media stories about corruption by Maltese officials. In one case, corporate spies secretly filmed an opponent inside his own home and followed him when he dropped off his child at school. The operations racked up bills of more than $7 million over more than 6 years and were coordinated by senior Steward executives who corresponded regularly with private spies, according to emails, encrypted messages, and financial records. These guys, I mean, let me scroll down a little bit here to show you. This is a picture. This is a screenshot. It's a little fuzzy, but that is a picture of a guy named Fraser Perring, who runs a short-selling firm called Viceroy Research. Now, these guys were also the short sellers who blew up the story on Wirecard, one of Europe's biggest ever frauds. And this company that he was investigating, he took out a short position on Medical Properties Trust because of their corrupt relationship with Steward Healthcare. And rather than run a better business, rather than paying their bills, I don't know, rather than maybe this guy selling his freaking yacht, they decided to hire $7 million worth of British special forces retired to follow Fraser Perring, to take pictures of him in his house while he's watching TV with his wife, follow him when he dropped his kids off at school. And there's stories, Fraser Perring saying his home security system, his CCTV stopped working. He came home, found his door open and his computer turned on. I mean, this is reading like a crime novel here. These guys hired ex-military, to try to manufacture fake evidence against their opponents. And, you know, all the while, this is going on in Malta. This is going on in the States. People are dying. Hospitals are going belly up. And I tell you guys, just take everything you hate about our medical system and everything that is so wrong about our medical system, and it is just perfectly packaged in this story. And you need to pay attention to this because, again, the socialists, the people who want the government to come over and take over every facet of healthcare, are watching this story, and they want this story to go national. They are going to use this as an example to make things even worse, in my opinion, by turning the whole system over to the bureaucrats that we just got done talking about in the Chevron deference story about how damaging that could be. So pay attention to this one, guys. And again, sorry if the veins were sticking out of the side of my head there. This one,
fantastic, really fantastic story, Jack, and such a great find about that Malta connection. So I kind of want to make a couple of connections here. One, Cerberus. So for those of you who follow me, they are the private equity firm that bought my company from General Motors. We were the lending arm of GM at the top of the last crisis. They then demanded a purchase price adjustment, which is why because they could see the market was turning after, they read some of the reports I sent them. But they could see the market was turning. They wanted a purchase price adjustment. And so that is when we started our write downs, which led the write downs of the entire industry and mortgage. So all those write downs of mortgage backed securities, things like that. In the Big Short, it gives a nice little narrative, but in reality, that Cerberus purchase is what really instigated a lot of the issues. And who is Cerberus? Well, at the time, my CEO that came over was from Bear Stearns. You look at the people at this company, they all should have gotten in a ton of trouble during the last cycle, but they didn't. We know people didn't go to jail. But ultimately, how did they get out of the whole mortgage issue? We got TARP funding at GMAC, and they were able to divest their ownership at a decent price. And what else happened? They didn't learn their lesson. They just took what they learned during the GFC about how they could get in an industry, cozy up to the government and be okay. And so that then led them to perpetuate what they did in the healthcare industry. And there's a great book for those of you who haven't read it, but called Plunder by Benjamin Bayou, who's an acting attorney general right now. They allowed him to print this book, and it talks about what private equity has done to this medical space. And, when thinking about private equity, guys, I think we often need to think about government contractors, which is another thing that Jack was talking about, because, what did BlackRock do, for instance, in the last crisis? They came in and managed distressed assets for the government. So a lot of this private equity sits at the crossroads of government grift, and they do that on purpose because they know at the end of the day that's going to save them to some extent. Now, so that was not a question, Jack. That was a but I will ask this question. So we see that this is happening. We also have seen with Obamacare, government getting more involved in healthcare. But so why is it then that Travis, who has good health insurance, for he and his family, went to the ER and had to pay $3,000 for his child to get checked out? So, we've had more government involvement. We've also had private equity, which is supposed to be all about, free markets. We know that's not true based on what I just said about the government grift. But so why are we still sitting here with healthcare completely unaffordable?
Well, I'm not going to say this specific thing has caused it, but if you're wondering maybe where the money went, why it's still so expensive, Cerberus Capital exited their position in Steward Healthcare in May of 2020 with a profit of about $800 million. They roughly doubled their money that they spent to buy the hospitals. They signed that sale leaseback with Medical Properties Trust. They doubled their money. They walked away with $800 million. And Ralph De La Tour and the leadership team at Steward Healthcare, when that deal was signed, paid themselves a $100 million dividend, $40 million of which went to pay for Ralph De La Tour's yacht. So while I don't necessarily know this policy decision will make Travis's trip to the ER cheaper, or maybe even, God forbid, improve the care that the kid receives at the ER, what a concept, right? I can tell you $900 million walked away with this private equity firm and these a-holes executives at Steward Healthcare, and what is left behind is bankrupt hospitals and patients dying waiting for care. All right, so that $900 million, that's where the money went. Now, I don't have the policy magic wand to save that. It sure as hell isn't the government come in and take over healthcare, because that's exactly what they did in Malta, and Steward went and ripped them off in Malta too by bribing the politicians. So, again, there's no magic, there's no silver bullet for this, if you will. But it's not hard to see where the money went. And the last thing I would point out, guys, is, the more we talk about insurance and, the whole Affordable Care Act thing, and, we're going to make healthcare more affordable. We need to stop associating health care with health insurance. They are not the same thing. And I would submit the biggest obstacle to care right now is insurance. How many bureaucrats do you need to hack your way through on the phone, in the office, before you can actually interact, see, or speak to an actual care provider? First, you got to get past that nasty person who answers the phone, that bureaucrat who needs to give you a pre-authorization and, oh, I'm sorry, that's not in our network. You need to talk with your HR department. All these people who don't have anything to do with medicine are standing between you and the doctors. Every single one of them is taking a paycheck. Every single one of them is contributing to that $3,000 bill that Travis had to pay to have his kids see a doctor. End of rant.
Okay. Okay. So, I have a question. I have a question for you. First of all, as far as the reaction to the story, I mean, man, I mean, betrayed again in America. Our medical system. I think our medical system, Jack, is one of the areas in America where, as a consumer and citizen, we want to have the most amount of trust. We don't want to ask these types of questions. I don't want to hear that some brand new mother passed away because the hospital was negligent. They didn't have something that was common. Now that child's going to be raised motherless. And so I'm getting sick of the betrayal, man. So, another thing I'm thinking is, like, hopefully that Chevron doctrine that Melody was talking about, they do something about it. But the fact that we're now, as Americans, when I grew up, I never thought of things like this, but now as Americans, we have to question all of the things that we wish as Americans we could trust. It hurts. It hurts. And I know I'm taking a hit. I pay $12,000 a year on insurance premiums, and I still have to pay out of pocket $3-4 grand for my medical procedure. My child to go in, to the ER. She got a test, so I know it was a little bit more expensive, but this is a very, very sad day. Because this is the transparency that Melody was just talking about with those laws being passed. But because I'm worried, man. I mean, we already have the transparency.
Well, let me just tell
story. But you just read the story, and nothing is. I mean, I know it takes time, but my God, man, I'm questioning if anything is going to change. But my question is for you, for the sake of time, Jack. I'm just going to get to my question. This is what matters to me. First thing I was going to ask is, where can people go to get quality care? But you're not a healthcare provider, so I'll just ask you this because you are an entrepreneur. The medical system's broke. It's unaffordable. I don't know how hospitals are going bankrupt when I have to pay so much money. Can a consumer first business plan, okay? We don't have the consumer first business plan right now, but can a consumer first business plan where the care goes to the consumer first before these hedge funds or before they're getting scalped like this? I mean, can that even, listen to me, Jack, with the way things are structured in the US, with how the greed and corruption and fraud is taken over, be realistic. Can a consumer first business plan even work? Won't that just bankrupt the healthcare system even more? Is there even a solution here? I mean, seriously, man.
I'll tell you who that system would bankrupt. That would bankrupt Ralph De La Torre. It would bankrupt people like Farmer Bro Martin Shkreli, that unbelievable epic dirtbag who bought the rights to an age drug and then raised the price 15,000%. He was just basically stealing insurance premiums from people. All right, that's who a consumer-facing healthcare system would solve. And I've wondered this myself because I'm trying to get treated for, I hurt my back. I'm trying to get through insurance and everything. And then they just look at you like numbers. Nobody cares about quality of life or anything anymore. And I just wonder if there were doctors or hospitals who just said, you know what, the hell with insurance. We're not dealing with it anymore. Here's what we do. Here's how much it costs. Pay or don't pay, and no more of this pre-authorization and this in-network, out-of-network. And think about how much money you're paying for insurance and how much money of our tax money is paying for it via Medicare and Medicaid. And who's really benefiting? The dirtbags. It's not the doctors. A lot of doctors, Steward Healthcare hasn't paid a lot of their doctors for patients they saw years ago still. These guys are still waiting to get paid. So the doctors aren't making the money. The nurses aren't making the money. The patients sure as hell aren't getting better care. The pharma executives who are manufacturing drug addicts with what they did with the opioid crisis, they're getting paid. The insurance execs are getting paid. Ralph De La Torre is getting paid. So, I'll be honest with you. I think it really is, we're in a situation where it's like tear the whole thing down and start over again. Start with the doctor selling directly to the patient and cut out everybody else. And just see what happens. That is how medicine worked right up until the last few decades. That is how it worked back then.
Do we have time for one question? Jack, you good?
Yeah, I got time for a question.
I thought you were mad at me. You were ignoring me.
No, I'm not, man. But this gets my blood up. I mean, like I'm like flush in the face right now. This story makes me so angry. A woman dying after giving birth like that. You know, it should be a happy moment, and it ends up being one of those like just life family wrecking events.
So there's a comment, and I think this is a really good comment, and there's a lot to talk about here.
Yep.
Don Peterson, if you took the profit out, because socialize, right? Let's take the profit, so they put the consumer first. Let's make laws or whatever, right? And how are they not making profit with how much money I'm paying so much money in medical? I don't understand how they're not filthy rich. But anyways, if you took the profit out of the medical system, you would lose the incentive for innovation, which is a fair comment.
It's
but
right.
They're also
right.
acknowledging greed is the problem. So on one hand, you got to let them be greedy. So there's innovation. What do you do, Dak?
I don't
want to comment on that.
Greed is a human condition. We're never going to solve greed, right? It's part of us. It's one of those things that's built into us that we all like to point fingers at other people and say they're greedy, but we all act in our own self-interest, right? And what animal doesn't? So greed is a human condition. That's not going away, not ever. And Don Peterson, I 100% agree with your comment. If you took profit out of the medical system, you'd lose the incentive for innovation. You'd lose the incentive for patient care, right? And oh my God, I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand as a first responder. I've gone into places where seniors are abused. I don't want to get into that. But I can tell you what we're seeing here, the profit is not going to the care providers. The profit is not going to the innovators, right? I have no problem if a doctor wants to study his butt off to become like my cousin, the trauma surgeon. My God, he is a superhero in my eyes. What this guy did, serving in the military as a trauma surgeon, you know, the rank that he achieved, and now what he does. I mean, he's a superhero in my eyes. He is awesome. He deserves every penny of wealth he has because of what he has given others, the value he has provided. The same thing goes to somebody. If someone innovates and creates a life-saving drug, they deserve to be set for life. Are you kidding me? They saved millions of lives. They should be rich, right? But that's not who's making the money. Ralph de la Tour didn't do 1 ounce of innovation. He didn't provide care to anybody. Ralph de la Tour violated his Hippocratic oath, and he let people die for his boat, right? And then he hired spies to protect that criminal racket that he had created. That MFer, pardon my French, guy, I'm really upset. That guy deserves to spend the rest of his life in a freaking cage for what he has done to people. There are plenty of people in jail who caused less harm than Ralph de la Tour and his like for much longer. There's plenty of people serving life sentences who caused less harm than he did. If he comes out of this not in a cage, then our healthcare system is as broken as our justice system.
It's like the worst of both worlds right now, right?
It really is. But I do agree with that comment. I'm not for taking profit out of medicine. People who provide a service and a product deserve to be compensated for it. But it's not. We need to figure out a way to protect against the leeches and the vampires, because they have become such a destructive, parasitic influence on the healthcare industry. We got to get them out somehow. They need to be carved out.
Melody?
No, I mean, I just would agree. I've just seen so many examples in my own life of how this has really gone awry, and, you know, people haven't gotten the care they need. And it just seems to be that in all these instances where we think that free markets are operating, what we come to understand is it's mainly government. And you take the mortgage industry, that's exactly the way it is there as well. They're 85% of all mortgages are owned by the government, guys. And then so the people that service them, you know, they are essentially working for the government. So then you need to have an agency like the CFPB, because you as a consumer don't get to choose who your mortgage servicer is, because basically they're working for the government. And so, I mean, this is just all, you can just see how much all of this is excessive administration has just, you know, caused all of this crazy price inflation in mortgage and housing and in the medical field. And so it is a complicated topic, but it's one that we have to talk about. And I agree with Jack. I mean, At this point, it just doesn't make sense anymore to pay a medical premium like you're talking about, Travis, $12,000. That, then when you go to the ER, I mean, and pay $3,000. I mean, that's insanity. And that's the
Yeah.
one thing when I think about deflation, right? We're gonna see it, in my opinion. But I think about insurance, and I think that's one area where I just don't see prices coming down unless there's a complete upheaval of the system.
All right. Anything else, Jack?
I would just say take the whole healthcare industry, start to finish, the whole freaking thing. How many of the people are actually providing care? And I think it's a warning sign against bureaucracy. And that's my biggest warning with this story, is that the socialists are circling overhead. As bad as Ralph De La Torre is, as bad as his kind are, just wait until the socialists take over the healthcare system. And they're going to point to this story as an example of a reason why we should give them more power. Look, you got government-run healthcare in Malta, and Stewart was able to rip them off too. And then they're hiring military guys to spy on anyone who calls them out. I know. This story is scary, guys. There
And
should be a movie about this.
Right. And one thing I just like to say for these, socialist adopters is you go back and really study socialism. And what it's about is the government saying you're not smart enough to make your own decisions. And so when you think about, we have to come in and we have to have this excessive government and we have to take control so that, private actors won't do what exactly Jack has just showed us. Well, guys, that's about saying you're too dumb to figure out how to choose the right doctors or how to choose the right system, or and is this system completely crazy? It sure is. But the socialism is about taking away your rights because they don't believe that you're smart enough to make those decisions for yourself.
Okay. All right, guys. I think we're moving on. Let's move on to the next story, all right?
Ooh,
So
yes.
we're going to move on to this next one. This is may be hopefully a loaded question. So the next story, you guys, I'm going to ask Melody, I'm going to ask Jack, and honestly, comment below. But look at the synergy that comes out of both of them. I feel like the synergy is absolutely incredible. With your ranting. I love your ranting. You guys comment the word rant below if you like the ranting. I know I do. I'm just trying to keep up, guys. But the next video and topic is going to be, when will homes be affordable again? And the answer may be a two-part answer, right? Because there's obviously things that we can do, the way we live our lives as consumers, and there's obviously some horrible things going on in the housing market. So, you got some rants. Look at, so they like the rants. Julius didn't like the rant, though. You may want to have a talk to him, Melody. He did not give us the rant. He just gave us a thanks. So I think we know where Julius stands. So if
He
you
was
guys see
having
him
a
on
private conversation with Kate.
roast him.
You just weren't paying
Roast him.
attention. No,
I wasn't
you read
paying
that
attention,
wrong.
but still roast him though. Just because he needs to be roasted, because he always calls me Ted Cruz. Do I really look like Ted Cruz? Don't answer it.
Hey,
Now,
did you see the Ted Cruz barrel decision flow chart?
no, I don't
Hurricane
like
barrel?
Ted Cruz. I don't want to talk about Ted Cruz.
Okay, well, we do have to talk about that at the end of the show because of the hurricane headed your way, but keep going.
As long as you don't call me Ted Cruz again. And that's stuck with Julius, man. I see Julius all the time. Hey, what's up, Ted Cruz? I'm like, oh, I've been losing weight, all right? Anyways, so couple things, you guys, when I'm talking about affordability and unaffordability, I think we need to put together the definition of those things so that no one gets swept away in BS. All right. So when we're talking about unaffordability, the first thing I want to explain is the price run up. And it's really easy for us to see how unhealthy and that gap of sustainability when we overlay the Case-Shiller Home Price Index overlaid on CPI, or consumer purchasing power. And what I wanted to explain, and Melody, you track this like crazy, is there's a double bubble. We have a double bubble. So in order to get back to affordability, because that's the question of this video, when will homes be affordable again? We got to first acknowledge how unaffordable things really are, because we have a double bubble. Remember 2017 into 2019, they raised the federal funds rate. They started doing quantitative tightening. So they knew a problem existed, or they would not have done those things. But a problem existed, boom, lockdowns, and we had our second bubble. So we have a double bubble. That's what I'm saying there. Now, another thing, guys, when it comes to unaffordability, what I'm specifically saying is, number one, freaking prices, right? Like, come on, guys. Like, we get it. Like, oh, incentives, lower interest rates. Who the hell? I'm just at the point I don't even care about interest rates anymore, except I want them to be higher because the thing that I care about is the more important thing, which is the price of the house. That is a huge thing. And when we look at the PE ratio, guys, this just updated, by the way. It's now updated. The PE ratio, the new PE ratio, let's see if I can get it, as of March is 7.7 times annual salary. If I'm not mistaken, this is the highest it's ever been. Let me go back more than 70 years and let's see. Oh yeah, it's the highest it's ever been, at least tracked by this data. So we have the highest price to earning ratio in the history of the United States. We got to take this into consideration if we're to guesstimate when the housing is going to be affordable again. The other thing is it's also payment. So I'm always like, hey, it's about price over payment, but I will not sit here and act like payment is not very important. In fact, sadly, you guys, and I don't like this, payment is more important than price to most Americans. And that is not good. I'm saying that's bad. But regardless, the national payment to income ratio is sitting at 35.9%. I want you guys to understand, Jack Melody, this is not counting property taxes. That ratio is not counting property homeowners insurance, which are both absolutely skyrocketing in places like where I'm at in Texas and in Florida. When I went to go re-rent because I was in a mold house, I put a verbal offer on the house. I almost sent an official offer, but I ran the homeowners insurance on that bad boy. Came back $5,800 a year. It should have been $2,200. So that's not in there. This is historically high. Obviously, it peaked back in the late 70s, but we're at 35.9% chance. What I'm saying is if they fairly calculated property taxes and homeowners insurance, it would probably be near all-time highs. Now, another thing, guys, we have to understand, I'm talking about affordability. Income has a play. When I'm talking about sustainability, when I'm talking about fundamentals, specifically in the housing market, a huge piece of that equation is the consumer's ability to afford to live. In order to afford to live, you have to have income that matches the affordability to live, inflation, right? And so when we adjust for inflation, we see actually income has a long way to go, and we are actually losing momentum, and we have lost momentum with real income for the last 3 years. And so these are major problems that is facing the housing market right now. And so, you know, with all of those things in mind, you guys, I have 3 questions for both of you, and I'm looking forward to it. I love interviewing you both. You guys are amazing people. My first question, Melody, and this is going to go to you, Melody. I need you to explain, understand, you guys, to the viewers, Melody and I both got hurt pretty bad during the GFC. And Melody, also understand that most millennials and younger, they have not experienced an overvalued house. They don't know what that's like. They're just like, if we can afford it. What's afford it mean, right? What's afford it mean? Is it P ratios like that? No. Melody, can you please break down in a way that consumers fully grasp, we're in a double bubble, just how unaffordable is the housing market really?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just did a great job of illustrating how unaffordable it is. But unfortunately, what happens is people look at that payment, like you're saying. You know, I have people contact me on X Twitter all the time. You know, my daughter's thinking about buying a house. She wants to buy in this overpriced neighborhood, but she has a great job. She's a physician's assistant, and she's going to put 5% down. And I'm just like, but she's also a single mother. And I'm just like, whoa, you know, stop first. Like, think about why is that house overvalued? Secondly, 5% down. If there is any kind of correction, you are going to be negative equity, like Jack explained he was in the GFC, like overnight. And Travis, as you and I know, it's not even just that prices have risen like this. We know that that was due to the bezel, meaning these aren't even actual prices. You know, Fannie Mae came out in its letter to appraisals and said in the 7 million comparables that they looked at, 55% of them were overstated, and that, you know, essentially the concessions weren't there. And so already you are likely living in a house that is overvalued because of that, because appraisers just went in and fluffed up these home and not all appraisers, but I'm just saying that this definitely happened. Fannie Mae saw it happen. And then we know the builders aren't really, capturing their concessions. And so there's a lot out there saying that these home prices, should be where they are, and they're just not. And so, just because you might be able to afford that payment, what happens if there is a correction that comes? Then let's take Florida, let's take Colorado, let's take California, let's take North Carolina, let's take Louisiana, Maine. I mean, it's all over the country. Insurance is skyrocketing. And at this point in time, insurance folks can't get the reinsurance they need to be able to offer lower rates, because how do they, essentially afford to pay out their coverage? They go out into the financial markets because we're so hyper financialized to try to get their coverage, and they can't do it right now. And so, there's a lot going on, but the fact, just because you can afford that payment, if you are, for instance, a physician's assistant, one thing that we know is that AI is coming for your job. I mean, that is one of the first places people are going to try to really use AI. How successful will they be? How quickly will that happen? I'm not saying that that's going to happen, and take everybody's job, but I do think that some of these lower order medical jobs are going to go the way of AI, and it will take time. But my point is that no industry that I am aware of right now is completely safe from a reduction in employment. And so essentially, yes, houses are unbelievably unaffordable. And if you're looking at different data series, some do say this is the most unaffordable ever. Others say that it was this unaffordable in the 80s. But as I talked about earlier in the show, we had women joining the workforce, and we were able to kind of carry that cost burden a bit easier than we can now, because our only options are really holding even more multiple jobs. So I don't know, Travis, if I answered that well enough for you, but.
Well, I mean, in the 80s as well, a huge thing that was different is look at how low the PE ratio was. So yeah, you can argue the payment to income ratio was higher in the 80s, but the thing that I point out constantly is the consumer back then had enough purchasing power to handle it. And it normalized because, again, they had more room to grow. Right now, there's no room to grow. They have squeezed the juice. They've squeezed all the juice. Now, Jack, same question to you, with an emphasis on the youth, not going through something like this before. But Jack, can you tell the viewers just how unaffordable is, whether you want to talk about price or payment, how unaffordable is the housing market right now?
Well, I mean, the housing market, to be able to afford, the last time I looked, which was a few months ago, the average cost to own was about 144% of the average cost to rent. All right. So just to give you an idea of like how priced out of the market are some people, that tells you it's okay to rent, right? So, I get this question a lot. I have a lot of millennials follow my channel and they want to own a home, and I don't blame them for wanting to own a home, but take it from a guy who lost all the money he made fishing in 2006, because I was there. I just wanted to own a home. Homes only ever went up, and so I bought at the top. And I got wiped out. My net worth went negative. And, joke was on me. I kept paying my mortgage, even though zombie homeowners walked away and they ended up making out great in the long run. I kept paying my mortgage and I paid my bills, because that's just what ethical people do, is pay their bills when they agree to make a payment. But it's cheaper to rent. And so it's okay to keep renting. If it's cheaper to rent, just make sure you're not doom spending the difference. Pay yourself the difference. Now, as far as affordability and where we're going, there's a couple of things that are kind of holding that back. Keep in mind.
I have that question.
You're going ahead. All right, go ahead. Give me the question.
No. I want to comment before, but you reminded me of something very important. When we talk about affordability, we have to remind the viewer that part of affordability is money out of your pocket. So the price, I was hoping, we really emphasize how unaffordable the actual price is compared to the payment. Because here's the thing, guys, if you're forced to sell for any number of reasons, divorce, death, job relocation, if you're forced to sell or you need to refinance and you don't have enough equity, because equity goes down in value, can you afford, right, to bring the difference to the closing table? Do you have 50,000? Do you have 60,000, 70? So affordability, that's going to help you get untrapped. And honestly, I know you do, Jack, because you're middle class. But a lot of people don't have $50,000-$60,000 hanging around where they could just pay to the escrow company to get out from underneath their house. So people really need to pay attention to what I'm saying as it pertains to the price. And if people have to buy right now, Melody, Jack, if you have to, because you can't convince people going to do what they want, I would just tell people to slow the roll and find that wedge, find that cash flow, and understand just how toxic those prices really are, and just how, understand how long you will be trapped. But this brings me, speaking of how long they'll be trapped, this brings me to my second question. Melody, if you can knock this out of the ballpark, please. I don't want a base hit. Okay. I don't want to strike out. I want no balls. Just knock this son of a gun out. Okay. I'm getting tired. There's a freaking hurricane outside. I'm getting comments here like, oh, it's starting to rain. Yeah, I'm scared. Okay. There's a freaking Cat 2 hurricane right outside my window right now. Scary.
Exaggeration much?
Do you want me to? Don't make me set up my camera to I'll bring this sucker. I'll go wireless right now.
I thought you said it was Cat 1 right now. Yeah, exactly.
I could do the drone. It would be tricky. No, it's raining and blowing. It'll get swept away. It's just the mini, man. Can't believe I actually entertained.
Little Trav can't handle that, Jack. Little Trav wasn't made for that.
See how trusting I am, Melody. It's hard to answer this, but we talked about the income, the fundamentals, but when and how does all of this change?
Yeah, so there's so much going on right now, guys. It's hard to keep track with all the news, and we'll talk about that in our last segment. But in reality, what we're probably going to start to see, in my opinion, is we're going to start looking a little bit like August of 2007 as we exit the spring selling season. And you're already starting to hear about price declines across the country. We know Texas and Florida are being hit. And everybody right now, it's so funny in the media to me, Travis, which, by the way, pat on the back to you and me for talking about Texas and Florida before everybody else. But everybody in the media is saying, but it's just Texas and Florida. Like, it's just subprime, right? Well, Texas and Florida are two of your biggest markets. Mm-hmm. And as Texas and Florida go, so goes the nation, mm-hmm. And so we're seeing price declines there already. I believe that likely we're going to start, we're going to just dire straits as we round the corner and in the selling season. And you're seeing more and more inventory coming online. Just as we talked about, just as we knew would happen, you're going to get more motivated selling, which is likely going to start turning into distressed selling as, layoffs are escalating here. And we know that it takes time with severance. And then if they do have a mortgage, that timeline can be extended forever. But there is already motivated selling, and we're going to start to see distress selling. And so my belief is that we'll probably end the year around a 5% price decline. However, 2025, all of these forces that you and I talk about are going to all the trains are coming to the same station, and they're going to hit all at once. I believe that's when you're going to start to see those meaningful price declines. Like my model right now says around 12%. And then further price declines for the next several years. And so, that's my forecast right now. Obviously, if war is declared, if suddenly we have martial law, if there's all kinds of things that could happen that would arrest that path. But right now, the path to me is very clear. Unaffordability is to a point that people simply cannot hold on to those houses. And we're seeing it all over the country, not just Florida and Texas. Insurance is rising everywhere, as are property taxes, and people can't afford it. And they will be putting those houses on the market.
Okay, good answer. And I will also like to add to that, if I may, Melody. This is going to go on. You guys, here's the thing with the housing market, going back to balance. My guesstimate is it's going to be drawn out to at least 2030. And then in 2030, we got a whole nother apparent silver tsunami, which is where like the older people are selling their house to downsize. And like 2030 has got its own set of problems, but this is going to be a problem for a long time. But I'm interested, Jack. I'm interested. Now, you've made comments, Jack. You've come onto my channel even. You've warned my viewer. You said, hey, Real Estate Mindset viewers, be careful. Because recession happens, unemployment happens, and then what does the Federal Reserve do? Quantitative easing, money printing, which generally will cause asset values to go up. You have warned about this, Jack. So with that in mind,
Yep.
sir, how does the unaffordability change? And when, if at all, do you believe it will?
So let me quote Morpheus, right? Or the Oracle from the Matrix. I can't see past a choice, right? You can only show you the door. You have to decide whether or not to go through it. We're coming up on a choice here. Reference that earlier data point, the 144% cost to own versus cost to rent. That means we've got a lot of insolvent landlords out there. If the payment on the property is more than the rental income, then that landlord is losing money. He's going to go out of business eventually. Now, there's loans that were taken out years ago at lower rates, so maybe that's not true across the board, but at least that is a trend that's going to increase over time. Being a landlord is a losing proposition in this market, which means landlords are going to start losing money, and we're already seeing that. Signature Bank failed. They were the largest holder of loans for multifamily properties, rent-controlled buildings. New York Community Bank was the second largest holder, and they were almost on the brink of failure. You know, they got rescued by Steve Mnuchin and co. Maybe that bank survives, maybe not. But we're already seeing landlords start to flop on a big scale. All right. And, you know, one of the things that drove this speculative bubble in housing that we're in right now was investment run amok. Airbnb craze, the Verbo craze. A lot of people bought properties planning on being short-term landlords. Those are going to start failing one at a time. But there's also the aspect of private equity firms buying single-family homes, right? Blackstone owns over 105 million single-family homes. Starwood owns a ton of them. These firms are months, in my opinion, months away from insolvency. I think they are going to blow up spectacularly. And that choice, to put my Morpheus glasses back on, that choice is going to be, will our financial regulators and our benevolent government overlords declare Blackstone and Starwood a systemic risk to the economy? Will they have to be bailed out? And if that's the case, then that means the government would be printing and borrowing money in order to continue to support these home prices. Because if we didn't declare them systemic risks and we let them fail, then their assets would go up for sale. And that 105 million single-family homes that Blackstone owns would have to go up for sale, and the price would have to come down until a buyer appeared, which at these interest rates is much lower. And we know Starwood is on the brink of insolvency because they're freezing withdrawals and all their REIT accounts. So the choice is going to be, do we let all these investors who came in and bought up single-family homes fail? And, you know, a lot of people have been saying on my channel and on other channels, we need to ban Wall Street from buying single-family homes. I say no, let them buy the homes and let them fail, and then let hardworking, responsible people buy those homes up on the cheap when they go on fire sale. But the government has to let that fire sale happen. They have to take all the bad that comes along with it. Recall that earlier comment about the wealth effect. And when home prices go down, that means people feel poorer and they spend less money at the retail places. And so the economy shrinks. So the politicians, at least the incumbent politicians, are incentivized to continue the bailouts, to keep the home prices elevated, to keep the consumption rolling while paying empty lip service to, yeah, we want to have affordable housing, but we're not willing to let that happen. So that's the choice. Do we let these firms go belly up when they do?
And
Melanie?
I'd just like to comment here that, guys, if they do try to come in and save these firms, that is when we take to the streets. I mean, we cannot let this happen. These firms have, you know, destroyed our purchasing power. And a very interesting story came out, I think last week, about the protest outside the city building, a city bank that is, and how, you know, the first part of the article was really trying to make it seem like it was all these, you know, very politicized topics, you know, around diversity and things like that. But in reality, when you looked at the names of the groups that were actually out there, it was like Hotties Against Wall Street, or, I mean, you know, but most of the names of the groups were about this kind of corporate greed, about housing unaffordability. And so I think what is happening, guys, is that there are already movements out there against these things. And there are people trying to organize around these topics, but the press is making you think like everybody, the Gen Zers, the millennials, are all just a bunch of idiots that, you know, are concerned about, you know, things like transgender rights only, things, you know, these politicized topics only. And in reality, I think that the younger generations do get what's going on here. And if they do try, if we get to that choice, Jack, then, let's not let them make the choice is my, it's time for Jack, Melody, and Travis to go back to DC if that happens.
Well, here's the thing, you guys. So again, the question is, when and how does that change? And to me, it's a two-part answer. And you guys nailed it with the corruption, fraud, greed. You nailed it, lack of trust, right? But there is a two-part answer. Probably a large part of that answer has to do with the individual as well. It has to do with the individual consumer, their spending habits, their purchasing power. Are they working on their credit? Are they working on their income? Are they saving money? Are they understanding how the market works, right? So what is their definition of affordability? I think half the people don't even have a definition of affordability. Their definition of affordability is I just got to have just enough to pay that bill. That's not affordability. Affordability is being able to save. And so that leads us to our last question. Jack, switch it up to you, Jack. Okay, you're looking good there, man. I feel like you got something great to. Feel like you got something great to say there, and thank you guys so much. I mean, I'm so proud of you guys to be working with you on a Saturday when there's a hurricane about to wipe me out. I know this is long, this is hard, so props to you, man, and woman, sister. Okay, last question, Jack. How can consumers protect, their purchasing power? And Jack, why should they? Remember in order for us to kind of have a recession, not in order, but a lot of people have given up hope. They've said, screw it. I'm going to the Taylor Swift. I'm going to the cruises. I'm going to buy the alcohol. I'm going out to eat. I work hard. Who cares about the recession? It's never going to come. It's never going to happen. Understand these things. Understand those things. How can they protect themselves and their purchasing power, Jack?
So, it's kind of a loaded question, Travis, because when you're talking about protecting purchasing power, you're implying how do you protect your liquid wealth, your cash, from inflation. Now, if we're talking about some kind of a correction in the housing market, well, that's a totally different scenario, because now you're talking protecting yourself against asset deflation. And well, if you have asset deflation, holding cash is pretty much where you want to be. So there's two different animals here kind of in that question. If you want to protect your purchasing power, I'm going to hold up my shiny again. I like the shiny. All right. I also like owning short-dated or short-term treasury bills at these interest rates. You're getting a premium over inflation. So, sitting in 5% T-bills right now, you're winning. So you're protecting your purchasing power if you do that. With precious metals, you're not going to make money with precious metals. I like to consider precious metals protection against a worst case scenario. At the very least, if the dollar becomes worthless, you can retain some of your purchasing power. So I like owning a little bit of precious metals and a little bit of Bitcoin to protect from the currency collapse. But again, during a recession, like say we do let these PE firms go belly up. We say to hell with Blackstone and Starwood. We're going to let them fail. And we're not going to print money and lower interest rates. We're going to let the economy right itself. Well, in scenarios like that, gold and silver would be worth a lot less money. In a scenario like that, cash becomes more valuable. Debt also becomes incredibly toxic in that scenario. So once again, it kind of comes down to that choice. What are they going to do? What does the central bank and the monetary authorities do? And the steps you take to protect yourself are going to be wildly different depending on that outcome. So it's a very loaded question there, brother. And I'll be honest with you, there's no one right answer to it.
All right, fine. Melody, you win. Okay, you're going to go out like that, Jack. You're not going to answer the question. Fine. Melody, you win by default. Right. I'm not sure what we're competing for. I have a certificate here. I made through Teachable. Do you want it? Seriously, it's through Teachable. I'm working on my school through Teachable, you guys. All right, Melody, same question to you. Just remind the viewers, how can we protect ourselves? How can we protect our purchasing power?
Yeah, so I think Jack is absolutely right that this is a really hard question, and we can't know, which direction or what decision is going to be made. And so we have to be diversified, and we have to, be ready for different scenarios. And I think that, my answer goes back to what I said previously, Travis, just about, protecting yourself. Don't be in reduced debt right now, because as Jack says, that could be incredibly toxic, depending on what decision is made. But so think of the outcomes, and think of the ways that you can position yourself. And to me, that is to be free of debt. It's to not be doom spending, just to be thinking about how I am spending that money. It is to diversify into hard assets like gold and silver. Of course, this isn't investment advice. I'm just saying these are ways that one could hedge against these very, these decisions that could be made. But guys, there is no perfect hedge. You know that if you're in mortgage servicing, there is no perfect hedge. What do I mean by that? I mean, there's been times in the history of this country where gold was, confiscated. So there's all kinds of things that could happen that we wouldn't even believe right now could happen. We couldn't believe what happened with COVID. And so we don't know, but we just have to always, be considering, how could I protect myself in the event of some of these decisions and scenarios. So
Yeah,
I don't
I
think
mean,
I did much
that's great.
better than Jack.
I mean, you both did great. Another thing that I like to point out for most people, right? We understand the economic turmoil, but just do it. I think that's a mindset. I wish I saw more people adhere to, is the mindset that, hey, if I have a goal, I'm going to go after it. I'm going to show tenacity. I'm going to obsess on my goal. I'm going to learn my skill. I'm going to fail. I'm going to get back up. I'm going to keep doing, and you can't keep me down. So, that mindset, I mean, that's a beautiful American, mindset. I love it. I love watching people succeed. That's why I always push Johnny. I don't know if he's on here. Johnny may open a hat company. I mean, I'm so proud of watching the community grow, you guys. So proud of it. I got a couple questions here, then we'll move on. I just wanted to say real quick, though, thank you to Charlie. Charlie gave us a $10 super chat. It's our first ever super chat. Means a lot, Charlie. Thank you. No question here, but big shout out to you, Charlie. Really appreciate it, brother. Now, going back to Jungle Book question. Let's see here. Didn't I have a different one from him? Here it is right here. He's got a couple. All right. So when did the recession start, and when does recession in real estate and rent start due to inflation? Well, this is already happening, but due to inflation outpacing income. Jack, you want to give that one a go?
Okay, if I had to say when the recession started, I would say sometime between November of 21 and March of 22 is when the recession started, as felt by most people. In November is when they started to slow down the money printing of 2021, and then in March of 22 is when they started to raise rates and destroy money via quantitative tightening. So I would say that is when the recession started. Now, when does depression or recession in real estate and rent start due to inflation outpacing income? I can tell you we're probably within 6 months of seeing somebody big blow up in the private equity space, like a Starwood. I think they're pretty close. The fact that they just halted withdrawals like outright, and they only had a few months worth of operating cash left available that they could draw down on their line of credit to stay solvent. I think we're probably within about 6 to 8 months of somebody big in private equity blowing up. And that's just because of commercial real estate. Also, keep in mind, private equity has other problems going on with startups and techs and the IPO pipeline that is broken down. And so a lot of private equity firms right now are borrowing money against companies that are worth much less than they have them on their books for, in order to pay fake profits out to their partners. So I think those failures probably start within 6 months. And then it becomes the choice, though. Do we bail them out right away or not? And I can't tell you how that's going to go. My gut tells me they probably will bail them out. It's the 2020s. Don't underestimate what scumbags these people are.
Melody, this one's for you. I love hearing you talk about this. Now, this is Tony. He's saying 50%. I think it's more than that, actually. But 50% of, it's a lot more, actually. 50% of rental homes are owned by mom and pop investors. I believe that's the definition of under 10 properties.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But what they're saying and pointing out here is many of them have also, in addition to that, full-time jobs. Will you talk on that, Melody?
Well, yeah, I think I think it doesn't matter if they have full-time jobs. We'll start there because property increases in property tax and insurance have made this not a viable situation. And you can talk to any landlord right now. They're going to tell you that the screws are being put to them. And it's not just property taxes and insurance, it's legislation in places like California where you have to, if you're going to have a multifamily, you have to have X, number of units. I mean, you can't evict people in many places across the country. I had one of my clients was threatened at gunpoint, and she wasn't by one of her tenants, and she wasn't able to get police assistance. I mean, things have just gotten a little crazy out there in terms of, squatters' rights, just the law and order and these types of things not being effective. And so I think you talk to any landlord, and this was absolutely true of the Great Depression. If you go back and read The Forgotten Man by Emily Schlaze, one of the best books out there, guys, talks about how everybody was a landlord. Everybody wanted to be a landlord, but shortly after, nobody wanted to be a landlord. So, I think that even if you have a full-time job, and I've seen this in my own family with people that were renting and the landlord came and said, hey, do you want to buy? Or just talking to other people that I know who are landlords, talking to you, Travis. So I just think that full-time job is not going to matter. But then let's talk about the fact that you don't have a full-time when let's say two people had a full-time job and one person loses that job. And by the way, to be a landlord, it's not about just covering your expenses. The idea is that you're making income off of that. And to Jack's point about, you can be in short-term treasuries right now making income. Landlords are deciding, listen, this is a headache. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to sell this house and I'm going to put it in T-bills and chill because why would I take the headache?
I mean, especially in investor heavy areas like Texas, Melody, where we have like astronomical property tax increases, and that really hits new homes as well. Generally new home property taxes is a lot more than existing. Now I have a question for Jack, and I'll try to speed this up. This is from Jungle Book. Jungle Book, thank you for being part of the Real Estate Mindset community, man. Thank you for participation. I hope we're giving back to you as well. Hope you're getting stronger, brother. And keep talking to the people, man. I just really appreciate you being part of the community. Why? And he's talking about your premise and your medical story, Jack. As far as like hedge funds and people coming in and just stripping away certain things, American rights, greed, corruption, fraud. But why is this any different from what people are doing and corporations are doing with LLCs and residential real estate? He's talking about fractional ownership. When you talk on fractional ownership, and is fractional ownership and what they're doing with fractional ownership, is that any different, say, to what's happening in the healthcare system?
I'm not really seeing the parallels to fractional ownership in LLCs with residential real estate, and then, somehow saying that has something to do with what Stewart is doing. I mean, what Stewart is doing is just strip mining. They're taking pre-existing assets, most of which were built with public funds, with big, they're basically tax dollars went to build a lot of these hospitals, right? And now they're sold to private firms who strip them out, run them into the ground, pay themselves handsomely, and then walk away. And then they hand it off to the government for them to figure out what to do. You're talking about socializing losses across the tax base as a consequence of a few people strip mining a community asset. I don't really see how that translates to a mom and pop investor or even a corporate investor buying single family residential, as long as the government doesn't come in and socialize the losses. That's the big if there is, will the government socialize the losses? Mom and pop investors won't get a bailout from the taxpayers, that's for sure. And neither should Blackstone or Starwood, but they might.
Melody, to you, if I may, this last question, we'll move on segments. Thank you guys so much for participating and sharing what your questions are. It helps guide us onto what we should be talking about. I mean, you guys see Jack, look how investigative is this. Where should we send him? Where should we send Jack? So thank you, Sub-Zero. Keep talking, keep building the community, guys. Melody, this is him. This is not me saying this. He's saying call him socialist, but some industries shouldn't be for profit. Do you agree with that statement, Melody? Is that what is needed?
Yeah, I don't agree with the statement because I think we have to think about incentives rather than profit and what incentivizes innovation, what incentivizes these things that we talked about earlier in the segment. And, UBI or universal basic income, government intervention, all of these things disincentivize people to innovate. So to me, I absolutely, I think we say things like for profit and that makes it seem evil and bad, but in reality, none of us do anything where we're not going to get profit. I mean, that's just it's very and it could be profit in the way of just, wanting to have social credit over someone else or just wanting to feel better about yourself when you do a nice thing. I mean, as Jack was saying at the beginning, as humans, this is deeply instilled in our our genetics as a way to operate based on, we do hunter gathered scenarios and why that is. But to me, it's just about properly aligning the incentives so that you don't get this outright corruption. And I just don't see how when you say but some industries shouldn't be for profit. Well, right now in the mortgage industry is backed by government, which is also for profit. So who exactly would be running this organization if not for profit? And aren't they profiting either in social power or something else? I mean, there's always a currency. It doesn't always have to be money.
Okay.
Cops get paid,
great,
right?
Great answer.
Don't cops get paid? Aren't they making a profit for providing law enforcement services? Don't doctors get paid? Garbage men get paid? Nothing is profitless. If it
about nuns?
requires the work or the input of an individual, there is profit involved. And
What about nuns, Jack? Mother Teresa? Did
nuns
she
get paid?
In what, the Holy
get paid
Spirit?
modestly, but nuns
A
get
living
paid.
wage, they get
Yeah,
free
their
rent.
housing is provided. They're free.
Yeah.
It's a noble lifestyle, but that's for profit. And look, take a place like Venezuela where nothing was for profit, right? They nationalized everything. The wealthiest woman in Venezuela is Maria Gabriela Chavez, Hugo Chavez's daughter. So somebody obviously made a big profit when nobody was allowed to make a profit. Still, it's so the question is, who's making the profit? If you're going to nationalize something, it's still a for-profit thing. It's just the government bureaucrats are taking the profit instead of some private individual. So,
And in
nothing
our
is profit.
quasi situation, the government then contracts it out to private equity or to some other group where they take the profit. And so they're all profiting, except the consumers are not profiting.
Just like the Steward Healthcare in Malta. Absolutely.
Exactly.
You had government healthcare. They took it over. They contracted it to Steward.
Correct.
And so it happens that Steward was bribing politicians to get that contract. So was it profitless? Not for the politicians, not for Steward Healthcare.
Right. Which is happening in our prison systems as well.
You guys, both of you, Jack, Melody, you guys are the greatest people I've ever met. So
thanks,
it's an
Travis.
honor to be here. Now,
you're all right too, brother.
Thank you. Moving on. Melody, your turn.
Excellent.
You ready, girl?
So, Travis, before we get
Right.
started with this next segment, I'd like for you to share my screen real quick as a reference here. So, hashtag to Julius Miami. But this is about the hurricane that is coming for Travis right now. This is a decision tree. So, Hurricane Beryl. Do I stay or do I go now? Is Ted Cruz, also known as Travis, at the airport? Yes or no? If yes, get the hell out. If no, is Jim Cantore on the seawall? I love this. And so it goes through the decision. No, is it a cat 3? Is it cat 1 or 2? Stay. But if yes, get the hell out. So anyway, Travis, we all hope that you're going to be safe in this oncoming storm. And I think this is a perfect way to intro this final segment where we're going to be talking about some other news over the last couple of weeks while DNM was on vacation, in quotation marks, and we had a few life events to take care of. But you can stop sharing my screen if you want to, Travis. We're gonna talk about in the most politically palatable way, the debate and the current conversation out there on whether or not Biden is going to be replaced. And so I'm just going to lead off, and this is going to be a roundtable discussion. I personally watched the debate. It was it was that I really don't have words for it. I woke up the next morning being completely shocked that there was that it actually had transpired. And so I think that for most Americans, that this was pretty shocking. And so I just want to quick turn it over to you guys, though, Travis and Jack, and whoever wants to go first. What were your thoughts after the debate, or did you watch it?
I'll go first. I did watch it. I didn't start watching it because my fear was like the last presidential debate. It was just so it was just so cringe. But this debate, when I was sitting back, Melody, and I was watching, not one time was I watching for a debate. Pretty much 5 minutes into it, to me, it was no longer about like who has the better responses to policy. And it was just like I was just watching, not trying to get political, but I was watching Biden. And I actually, I got to be so careful. Sometimes I have a big heart, and I felt bad for that old man. And I was just like, my God. But that feeling of feeling bad
Well, I
for
think
this
many
man was,
people call it elder abuse. I mean, I don't think,
right.
yeah,
But that was quickly replaced by like, how can we trust anything that is coming out from an administration to where the leader doesn't even know what's going on? And so it to me, that debate was really horrible. And I'm not telling you who I voted for, Trump or Biden, but as a country, I think it was really bad. And I also put myself through the eyes of the world, and I'm like, man, I mean, how does the world feel about the US? Do they think that we're weak? I mean, do they think that we're happily voting for these people? It was a horrible debate, and I felt bad for Biden, but I felt even worse for America, and it made me not trust the government even more. I mean, I don't trust them. I mean, if this is clearly, I mean, they can't hide if that's clearly what's going on, and they're hiding it. They're talking about replacement, talking about Gavin Newsom, who, in my opinion, is doing an absolutely terrible job in California. How is he even being voted? Replacing him, and then you got this whole battle going on with. Apparently, he wants to stay in the race, but his own party is throwing him under the bus. And then I also asked this, Melody: did they do that on purpose? Did they make him look senile so that they can start the process of replacing him? Because in no way did I see that helping anyone on his side of the fence. And that's what, and I hate to talk about this, but that was.
Well, I think, Travis, you're asking. And so I worked for someone who was a senator for 18 years, and he ran for the presidential nomination and almost beat Gore. And so I have a lot of experience in this area that I try to forget. But in watching that, I have to tell you that when any of these candidates do something like this, every interview, every question is vetted, everything is very scripted and staged. And so when he had done that, I guess it was 3 weeks ago, that interview where he kind of looked really silly on the economy. I know that if any journalist had asked a question that that the press secretary hadn't signed off on, they would be cut off. That they would be absolutely a black sheep. And so that to me looked a bit, and I know this is, I'm getting out my tinfoil hat, but it's based on experience. That looked to me to be very staged. And then to watch this, I had to wonder if there was an earpiece in his ear and he was being given the wrong answers on purpose. And so because they were just so crazy. I mean, it was just none of it made any logical sense. And so I am putting on my tinfoil hat, but I also had that question, Travis. But over to you, Jack.
So I was shocked by the debate. But what shocked me is not what shocked anybody else. What shocked me is that Donald Trump finally learned to keep his mouth shut. And, me and my dad were talking a lot. And, it was what should Trump's strategy be? And both of us kind of agreed was Trump's strategy should be shut up and let Biden talk. If you want to look good, let Biden talk, because Biden could make a potato look smart at this point. And shockingly, Trump was able to do that. So it's a personal growth story when you think about it that way, because Donald Trump is not known for his ability to keep his mouth shut, is he? No. Now, beyond that, I would just say shame on the entirety of the journalism industry, because Nobody was surprised. Anybody who has been paying attention was not surprised by what they saw. We beat Medicare, whatever the hell that means. Nobody was surprised by that. We have all watched this man deteriorate. We've all watched him wander around the stage. We've all watched him look to his handlers, wondering where he should go, try to shake hands with people who weren't there, slur his speech. We've all seen it happen. And the entire journalism industry has told us it's not happening. They have told us, don't believe what your eyes and ears are telling you. Much the reason we started this channel because of the economy and the financial thing that we all see happening. And the press is telling us, don't believe it. The same thing with Biden's condition. All right. So shame on every journalist. Joe Scarborough, you unbelievable joke of a journalist. And the talking point about how he's cogent. He said he's sharper than he ever was. This was like 2 months ago. He said this. And just a week before the debate, all of the press was going around parroting this cheap fakes BS talking point that all the videos we've all seen of this guy shaking hands with invisible people and just wandering aimlessly about, saying that they were out of context or selectively edited. And don't believe what you're seeing. Listen to us instead. Shame on every one of you. You're a joke. And now you're sitting there saying, what do we do? This is a crisis. This is a crisis of your making in journalism industry, because we should have had this conversation a hell of a long time before now. And so forget the election for 1 second. Now that they can't pretend anymore, it's gotten so bad we can't pretend. There is not a functioning, cognitively present individual occupying the Oval Office right now. This is a constitutional crisis. The 25th Amendment needs to be evoked yesterday, and Kamala Harris needs to be sworn in as president. And I do not make that statement lightly, because I think she is a cackling buffoon, but she is what the voters chose when they elected Biden-Harris. Biden is clearly not capable of carrying out the functions of the office. The job is too damn important. Kamala Harris needs to be sworn in yesterday as president. And oh my God. And I don't say that lightly, but at the very least, if somebody says there's a missile in the air and here is the button, you have a person who understands the freaking question. Do I push it or not? Instead of what year is it? And what did I have for lunch? And shaking hands with people who aren't there. And then once that is taken care of, the Democrats can decide who they want to run. All right. And this is not a matter of somebody's policy I disagree with. All right. Everybody's saying whataboutism. Oh, Trump lies, or Trump did this, or Trump is a racist, or this or that. Hey, perfectly valid arguments to be had, whether or not. At the very least, the man is in possession of his faculties. You may disagree with his policy. You may not like him, but he's there. Biden is not. He cannot be in that office anymore.
Yeah. So, that's what you think should happen. What do we think is going to happen? But, because I agree with you, Jack, the fact that this hasn't, this shouldn't be about, should we replace him? How does he feel? Blah, blah. I mean, this is a constitutional crisis. And the fact that we're not acting like it, and we're all just, yammering talking heads, after that debate, just watching that display, which very much felt staged and scripted to me as well. The response from the journalists, are you insane? Okay, all of these questions that you just brought up, Jack, are what we should be discussing, but instead we're just bubbleheads, yammering on, talking about old points when it feels like we have a country in serious crisis. So what do you think they will do? And we could start with Jack and then maybe go to you, Travis.
First of all, who are they? We don't know. We don't
Yeah.
know who's running the country. We haven't known for a long time. And that's why Kamala needs to be sworn in yesterday. All right. Because, and again, I didn't vote for Kamala. I don't like Kamala. I don't like her policies. But that's who the voters chose, not the people who are leading around Biden like a puppet. All right. We didn't vote for puppeteers. We voted for Biden-Harris. All right. And I know there's probably people like, I didn't vote for him. I get it. But, that's what the election outcome was. Kamala should be in there. I have my tinfoil hat on, because if Biden refuses to drop out, I think they'll unalive him. I really do. Something in his food, a pillow while he's sleeping, they won't leave him on the ticket. And honestly, I know I'm probably going to be told I'm crazy for thinking this. I think he will die of natural causes. And, then he becomes a martyr that can rally the troops and a political asset instead of the liability that he is. And I think people have been killed for much, much less.
Well, I think this is where we all need to be paying attention because I think that, in every conspiracy, there's a grain of truth. And I think right now, what I'm sensing is that there isn't a clear path forward. And so they're running multiple simulations. What does that mean? So the New York Times story about Joe Biden was very interesting to me because one thing that people have brought up has been about, the fundraising dollars were already earmarked for Biden. Well, this could be very much a Mel Carnahan situation where Carnahan died in a mysterious plane accident. He was a senator running for reelection in Missouri. But his wife, they left the Carnahan name on the ticket and she carried it because it all happened so quickly, last minute, et cetera. So I feel like what we're probably seeing are several different scenarios being kind of, run at the same time of I don't think there's one group or people out there that just absolutely understand what's about to happen. I mean, they are probably looking at different ways to deal with this problem, but that's when we need to be looking at these news articles and understanding why are we hearing about this now? And what are they trying to make us believe or make palatable?
Look, this happened. Like, we watched old man kings and emperors in ancient Rome be wielded by their underlings and do immeasurable harm to their civilizations. I mean, this is a constitutional crisis, this man's condition. And I'm not saying that because I don't like his policy. All right. And I'm sitting here saying, put Kamala in, who is like the antithesis of me. Right. I disagree with Kamala Harris on probably everything that would ever come out of her mouth, but she should be president right now. I don't say that lightly.
Travis,
Sorry,
what do you think?
Oh,
no, I think we both feel passionate about this. Travis?
I mean, I think politics are a joke. I know exactly what's going to happen next. The same thing that happens every single time we're in elections, and that is division. Division is going to happen next. We're going to lose more power to the people. They're going to distract us with this nonsense, and probably, I'll tell you this. All right? I don't want to waste my time, with that necessarily. I want to protect myself, but I'll tell you what I hope doesn't happen, because I already know the division will happen. I hope they don't send Trump to jail. Not because that's necessarily who I'm going to vote. I refuse to tell anyone who I vote for because I don't want to add to division. But I hope they don't send him to jail, because if they do that, imagine how many people would be in an uproar. And don't forget, he is going to be sentenced. Talking about the judgment of one person, Melody, that judge. So I hope that doesn't happen. Probably what's going to happen is Gavin's going to take it. I think that I agree with you guys that my feeling is they will force him out. They will force Biden out if he doesn't go out on his own. To me, it's just that's the only one that's supporting Biden seems like his wife, and his wife is talking to him like a child. So I don't think that helps anyone seeing that type.
Politically, I don't know how they can do Gavin. I mean, again, not from a policy perspective, but for the Democratic Party, how do you defend skipping over the first black female vice president in favor of a white male with everything they've done with identity politics for the last 20 years? How can the Democrats possibly defend doing that?
I don't care. To me, that doesn't matter. I don't care. The biggest thing that I'm afraid of, to be honest with you, I don't even know if I should say it on this video, but my biggest concern, I'm in Texas, guys. All right, I'm in Texas. I'm right next to Eagle Pass. I see that we have no border. I see the terrorist list of the reported apprehensions of terrorist suspects. I got a bad feeling in my stomach that we're going to have an attack on our soil. And that is my biggest concern with a tinfoil hat, call it what you want. But you can't help me. I'm in Texas next to Eagle Pass. I think there might be bigger things at play here that we have no idea about. And I think that may happen in the next 3 months, quite frankly.
Well, when The Onion, the magazine that's known for its sarcasm, the front page is, I'd rather have a nuclear war in DC or whatever it was than, watch this debate. It's kind of funny for 1 second, and then it's really not funny at all that we've come to a point where watching this debacle is more painful in somebody's, imaginary comedy mind than a nuclear attack on Washington, D.C. And I'm certainly, I'm not saying that's exactly what they were saying, but it's just telling that this is where we are.
It's sad.
It's very sad. And so I don't like to leave us without hope, and this is the last segment of our show today. But what do you think? Like this does seem, I mean, it's so crazy that it's almost hard to comprehend and hard to understand. But what are some actions you think we could take to maybe try and influence the outcome?
Well, I
Lead
can
by
tell you,
example. I'll say one thing is to lead by example, catch the youth up. When I look at my own situation, Melody, sorry to interrupt you, Jack. When I was in youth, I didn't give a crap about politics. I was just worried about making money and continuing the lifestyle that I was sold to live. So at first, I think we got to catch up the youth and say, hey, I know you think your vote doesn't matter, and maybe it doesn't, but all of your vote matters. Together, when we all have the right mindset, and I think we got to catch up the youth to having the proper mindset. We got to put it easy, like, hey, when you print money, here's what happens. Okay. When you do this, let's make it super easy. This is what happens. This only ends one way. Here's history. Save your money. This is a resume. So I think we got to catch up the youth. But another thing, I think this may be the biggest thing of all. I mean, as far as solution here, I mean, we need someone to lead us by example. We need someone that understands and like seriously understands what we're going through as American citizens. And I want that person to lead us. I don't want someone perfect or a great politician. I want someone that understands and empathizes with normal people. And I don't see that person, Melody. So I don't know the way out of here, except, it starts in our household, and I said, there's a 2-part to that last question. The first part was the economy. The second part is us and our household. And I really think that other than just going to vote, it starts with our households as well. Our children, how we raise our children. Are we raising them to be our best friends? Or are we raising our children to be leaders? And if you're raising your children to be leaders, thank God for you. That's what America needs.
Jack?
well, most voters only vote in presidential elections, right? Not that, what do we get, like 54, 55% turnout? So, I mean, half of voters don't vote. The other half, most of them only vote in presidential elections. Even fewer of them vote in midterm elections. Even fewer of them vote in local elections. And even fewer of them vote in primaries. And if you're sitting there saying this is disgusting, how is it possible that these two are our choices for 2024? I would ask, did you vote in the primary? Because the primary is when these choices were selected. And your vote counts far more. There's way more weight behind your vote in a primary than there is in the general election, certainly a presidential election. And that's when these two subpar candidates, in my opinion, were chosen. And so, most people sit out politics because it's a joke, because you have to hold your nose to pick one. And I agree with that sentiment. But the fact that everybody stays home means the radicals in both parties are in charge of picking who is on the ticket. So if you don't like the choices, vote in a primary, vote for a different choice. I mean, the one claim to fame, or if you will, or the one thing I tell myself is my guy never, ever wins in the primary. I always vote against primary losers because the party choices suck. And I wish more people who are towards the center would vote in these primaries, and maybe we would have better choices.
All right. Yeah, from my perspective, yeah, I mean, I think that right now it feels a little hard to know exactly what to do, but I agree, Jack. We have to get vocal. We have to vote in the primaries. And if we don't like this election system, we have to do something about it. And so, I mean, it's kind of interesting to me. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a national issue. So why aren't people in Washington right now, I guess? And it's my question, why am I not there right now, for instance? And, why am I not helping to organize folks? And so I think that those are questions we do have to ask ourselves. And honestly, we have to think about, okay, what is our role? What can I contribute that no one else can? And I think that, what we're trying to do here, Jack and Travis, is to bring an actual logical, of course it is somewhat emotional just because, I mean, it is, but a conversation that can be held, without yelling at one another, without yelling at opponents, trying to look at each side fairly, objectively, like Jack saying, vote, get Harris in there, even though she stands against everything that I agree with. I am 100% behind the Constitution. And so I think that those are the questions we have to ask ourselves. What is it that we can do? And if you have a family of 4, you cannot, get in a car and drive to Washington. That's just not something you can do. But what can you do? If you're commuting, can you call your congressperson? Can you talk to your children? Can you, tell your children why it's important to vote in the primaries? I mean, there's all little actions that each of us can do each day. And I think that's what we have to focus on. Or we will become, just depressed about the topic. But there are tiny actions we can take, and we just have to take that first one.
Very good. Very good. Is that it? I mean, dude, we were not supposed to talk this long. It's almost 3 hours.
We're never supposed to talk this long.
I got a big mouth.
How are we at 3 hours? We did 2 less stories. I don't understand this. It's crazy.
Time flies
Are you
when
guys
you're zooming, brother.
Jack, you want to, let's get everyone out here, man. I'm about to fall out of my chair and I got to check on this hurricane, but anything you want to end with, Jack?
No, I just want to say it's good to be back with you guys. Thank you, Travis. I wish you well, brother. Please be safe. Take care of you and yours. And when the storm blows over, check in with us. Let us know you're okay. And thanks for everything you do, man.
Of course, Melody.
I second that.
Okay. You want to end us out of here, Melody?
Sure. Thanks, you guys, for joining us. We did miss you the last 2 weeks. We're all very bummed that we weren't able to do this. So thank you for tuning in. We hope you tune in again next week. And don't forget, math matters.